Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Thomas Davis, and I am 36 years old. This happened in Flagstaff, Arizona, 3 years ago, when what started as a rejuvenating hiking trip to Humphreys Peak in the Coconino National Forest turned into a waking nightmare that still haunts my dreams. I had been working at a software company in Phoenix for nearly 5 years, spending my days in air-conditioned offices, staring at screens until my vision blurred. The monotony had begun to eat away at me, and my therapist suggested I reconnect with nature to combat my growing anxiety. So, when my two closest friends from college, Ethan Reed and Marcus Wilson, suggested a 4-day hiking trip to Humphreys Peak, I jumped at the opportunity. Ethan was always the adventurous one, a former cross-country athlete with a lean build and boundless energy. His sandy brown hair was perpetually windswept, and his green eyes sparkled whenever he talked about his outdoor exploits. Marcus, on the other hand, was built like a tank, a gym enthusiast with broad shoulders and a booming laugh that could echo across canyons. He had recently gone through a messy divorce and needed the escape as much as I did. We arrived at the Snowbowl parking area on a crisp September morning. The aspen trees were just beginning to turn golden, creating a stunning contrast against the deep greens of the ponderosa pines. The plan was simple: hike up through the Kachina Peaks wilderness area, camp for 3 nights at different spots along the trail, summit Humphreys Peak, the highest point in Arizona at 12,733 feet, and return to civilization reinvigorated. "You ready to disconnect from the Matrix, Thomas?" Marcus asked, slapping my shoulder as we hoisted our backpacks from the trunk of his SUV. "More than ready," I replied, inhaling deeply. The air smelled of pine and earth, so different from the recycled office atmosphere I'd grown accustomed to. Ethan was already studying the trail map. "If we make good time, we should reach the inner basin by late afternoon. The aspens there are supposed to be spectacular." The beginning of our hike was everything I had hoped for. The Weatherford Trail wound through dense forest, occasionally opening to reveal breathtaking views of the San Francisco volcanic field. My anxiety seemed to melt away with each step, replaced by a growing sense of peace. We talked about old times, shared recent life updates, and fell into comfortable silences broken only by the sound of our boots on the trail and the gentle rustling of leaves. But as we climbed higher, something began to change. The wind picked up, carrying a strange, acrid smell that reminded me of burnt hair. Marcus wrinkled his nose. "What the hell is that?" "Probably just a forest fire somewhere," Ethan suggested, though he frowned as he scanned the horizon. "Don't see any smoke, though." I felt a subtle pressure building in my ears, as if we were rapidly gaining altitude, though our ascent had been gradual. A dull headache began to throb behind my eyes. I attributed it to the elevation and pushed on. By mid-afternoon, we reached a small clearing where we decided to rest. As I took a swig from my water bottle, I noticed something strange. A perfect circle of mushrooms about 20 feet in diameter, their caps a deep, unnatural purple. I pointed them out to Ethan, who approached them with curiosity. "I've never seen this species before," he said, crouching down for a closer look without touching them. "The coloration is bizarre." "Leave them alone," Marcus called from where he sat on a fallen log. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about fairy rings. Bad luck to mess with them." Ethan chuckled. "Didn't take you for the superstitious type, Marcus." "I'm not," he replied, his expression unusually serious. "But some things you just don't fuck with." We continued our hike, but the discovery of the mushroom circle had somehow changed the atmosphere between us. The conversation became sporadic, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Several times I turned quickly, convinced I had seen movement in my peripheral vision, only to find nothing but swaying branches. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked after about an hour of hiking. "Hear what?" Ethan stopped, adjusting his pack. Like whispering or singing. I can't tell. Marcus and Ethan exchanged a glance that made my stomach tighten. I didn't hear anything, Marcus said, but there was an edge to his voice that suggested otherwise. By the time we reached our first campsite in the inner basin, surrounded by a grove of aspen trees, the sun was beginning to set. The golden hour light filtered through the leaves, creating dancing patterns on the forest floor that should have been beautiful, but somehow seemed menacing. We set up our tents in silence. The earlier camaraderie evaporated. "I'll get the fire going," Ethan said, collecting small branches and kindling. I nodded, unpacking my sleeping bag and pad. The headache had intensified, and now there was a strange ringing in my ears. I shook my head, trying to clear it. "You okay, Thomas?" Marcus asked, his voice seeming to come from much farther away than the few feet that separated us. "Yeah, just tired," I lied, "and maybe a bit of altitude sickness." The fire refused to catch properly despite Ethan's best efforts. The flames sputtered and hissed, occasionally flaring with an odd greenish tinge before dying down again. The smoke curled upward in unnatural patterns, sometimes seeming to form shapes, faces, hands, writhing bodies, before dissipating. None of us mentioned it. We ate our freeze-dried meals in uncomfortable silence as darkness fell completely. The forest around us came alive with sounds, the rustling of nocturnal creatures, the hooting of an owl, the distant howl of what might have been a coyote, and something else, a rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on wood, coming from just beyond the circle of firelight. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. "Do you hear that?" I whispered, not wanting whatever was making the sound to know we'd noticed. Ethan nodded slowly, his face taut with tension. Marcus reached for the hunting knife he kept sheathed on his belt. "Probably just a woodpecker," Ethan said, but his tone betrayed his doubt. "At night," Marcus shot back. The tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by what sounded like low, throaty chuckling. "Okay, this is fucked up." Marcus stood, clutching his knife. "Hello? Is someone there?" The forest fell silent. Too silent. Even the natural sounds of insects and animals had ceased. "It's nothing," Ethan insisted, but his voice cracked. "Let's just get some sleep. We have a long day tomorrow." None of us slept well that night. I lay awake in my tent, listening to the sounds of the forest, which had resumed their normal patterns eventually, until about 3 a.m., when I heard what sounded like footsteps circling our campsite. Light, deliberate steps that would pause occasionally, as if whatever was making them was stopping to listen or look. I wanted to call out to Ethan or Marcus, to ask if they heard it too, but fear had paralyzed my vocal cords. Instead, I curled deeper into my sleeping bag, trying to convince myself it was just a deer or some other harmless wildlife. The footsteps eventually stopped outside my tent. I held my breath, heart hammering so loudly I was certain whatever was out there could hear it. The fabric of my tent rippled slightly, as if something had run a hand, or claw, across its surface. Then came a sound that still makes my blood freeze when I remember it. A voice, barely above a whisper, speaking in what sounded like a twisted, ancient language. The words were unintelligible, but the malevolence behind them was unmistakable. Then, silence. When dawn finally broke, I emerged from my tent to find Ethan and Marcus already up, their faces haggard from lack of sleep. "Did you—" I began. "Yes," Marcus cut me off. "Let's pack up and keep moving." As we prepared to break camp, I noticed something that stopped me cold. A series of strange symbols carved into the bark of the aspen trees surrounding our campsite. They hadn't been there the night before. I was certain of it. The symbols resembled no alphabet I recognized, jagged, angular marks that hurt my eyes to look at directly. "Guys," I called, my voice trembling, "look at this." Ethan approached slowly, his face paling as he examined the markings. Those Those weren't here yesterday." "Must have been someone messing with us," Marcus suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. "Some local who saw us making camp and decided to freak out the tourists." "In the middle of nowhere? In the middle of the night?" I countered. We decided to continue our journey, unanimously agreeing without saying it aloud that we wanted to get as far away from that campsite as possible. But as we hiked higher up the mountain toward Humphreys Peak, the sense of wrongness only intensified. The trail, clearly marked on our maps, began to meander in ways that didn't make sense. Landmarks mentioned in the guidebook appeared in the wrong places, or not at all. Our GPS devices showed conflicting information and eventually stopped working altogether. "Battery's dead," Ethan muttered, shaking his device. "That's impossible. I charged it fully before we left." Marcus and I checked our phones. Also dead. Even my watch had stopped at 3:17 a.m., precisely the time I had heard the footsteps outside my tent. "This is some Blair Witch shit," Marcus growled, shoving his useless phone back into his pocket. The farther we hiked, the more disoriented we became. The sun seemed to move too quickly across the sky, and shadows fell at impossible angles. The forest around us changed subtly, the trees growing more gnarled and twisted, the underbrush thicker and thornier. Even the air felt different, thicker somehow, as if we were breathing through wet cotton. By what should have been midday, though without functioning timepieces, it was hard to be certain. We reached a part of the forest none of us recognized. The ponderosa pines and aspens had given way to ancient-looking trees with bark as black as coal and leaves that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. A heavy mist had descended, reducing visibility to mere yards. "We need to turn back," I said, my voice sounding strangely muffled in the thick air. "This isn't right." "Turn back to what?" Ethan's voice had a hysterical edge. "Do you even know which direction we came from anymore?" He was right. In the mist and strange forest, I had completely lost my bearings. The trail had disappeared beneath our feet, replaced by spongy, dark soil covered in writhing fungi that seemed to recoil from our footsteps. "Let's just pick a direction and stick to it," Marcus suggested, trying to sound rational though his voice shook. "We're bound to hit a trail or road eventually." We chose what we thought was west and began walking. The mist thickened, and the strange forest grew denser. Occasionally, we would hear sounds from the distance, branches cracking, what might have been voices, but the fog distorted everything, making it impossible to determine direction or distance. And then we found the cabin. It materialized from the mist so suddenly that we nearly walked into its weathered wooden walls. A small, dilapidated structure with a sagging roof and windows that were dark voids in the gray light. "This isn't on any map," Ethan whispered as if afraid the cabin itself might hear him. "Maybe it's abandoned," I suggested, though the prickle at the back of my neck told me otherwise. "Could be a ranger station or an old hunter's cabin." "We should check it out," Marcus said. "Maybe there's a radio, or at least a map." Before I could protest, he approached the door and knocked. The sound echoed unnaturally loud in the mist-shrouded forest. No response. Marcus tried the handle. The door swung open with a groan of rusted hinges, revealing a darkness so complete it seemed solid. "Hello?" Marcus called into the darkness. "Anyone home?" Nothing. "I don't like this," I muttered, but Marcus was already stepping across the threshold with Ethan reluctantly following. I stood outside for several moments, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But where would I go? Lost in an unfamiliar forest, in a mist that seemed to deliberately obscure the way. And I couldn't leave my friends. With a deep breath that did nothing to calm my racing heart, I stepped into the cabin. The interior was a single room, sparsely furnished with a rough wooden table, 2 chairs, and a small cot in the corner. A cold fireplace dominated one wall. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, undisturbed for what looked like years, except for a clear path from the door to the table, as if someone had recently walked there. On the table sat a leather-bound book, opened to a page filled with the same strange symbols we had seen carved into the trees at our campsite. "Don't touch that," I warned as Ethan reached for the book. Too late. His fingers brushed the yellowed page, and instantly the door slammed shut behind us with a force that shook the entire cabin. Marcus rushed to it, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "It's stuck," he grunted, putting his shoulder against the wood and pushing with all his strength. "Or locked somehow." A low chuckle emanated from the darkest corner of the room, where the light from the grimy windows couldn't reach. We froze, turning slowly toward the sound. A figure sat in a chair that I was certain hadn't been there when we entered. An elderly woman, her face deeply lined with skin like tanned leather stretched too tight over her skull. Her eyes were milky white, blind, I initially thought, until I noticed how they tracked our movements with predatory precision. Her clothes were old-fashioned, a long dress of faded black that might have been stylish a century ago. "Lost, are we?" Her voice was like dry leaves rustling with an accent I couldn't place. "You boys are a long way from the trail." "Who are you?" Marcus demanded, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. The old woman's thin lips stretched into a smile that revealed teeth filed to sharp points. "You can call me Agnes. Agnes Blackwood. This is my mountain. Has been for, a very long time." "Your mountain?" Ethan echoed. "But this is national forest land." Agnes laughed, a sound like bones breaking. "Is that what they call it now? Doesn't matter what name men give to the land. The land knows who it belongs to." I found my voice, though it came out as a whisper. "We're just trying to get back to the trail. Can you help us?" "Help you?" Agnes tilted her head at an unnatural angle, her neck seeming to bend farther than human anatomy should allow. "Why would I do that? It's been so long since I've had visitors." The way she said visitors made my skin crawl. "We have people expecting us," Marcus bluffed. "They'll come looking if we don't return." "Will they?" Agnes's blind, not blind eyes fixed on him. "No one will find you here. This place, it doesn't exist on your maps or in your world, not really." As if to emphasize her point, a sound came from outside, that same rhythmic tapping we had heard at our campsite. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Agnes smiled wider. "My children are getting restless. They smell your fear. It excites them." "Your children?" Ethan's voice cracked. "Not born of my body," Agnes clarified with a dismissive wave of her gnarled hand. "Born of my will. Born of the mountain. Born of the darkness that was here long before your kind came with your maps and flags and claims." The tapping intensified, joined now by scratching at the walls and what sounded like dozens of hands pressing against the windows, though the mist outside obscured any view. "What do you want from us?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Agnes leaned forward and I could smell her breath, like grave dirt and rotting meat. "Want? I want what I've always wanted. Company. Eternity gets so lonely." She stood, moving with a fluidity that belied her apparent age. "One of you will stay with me. The others may go." "Fuck that," Marcus spat, drawing his knife. "We're all leaving." Agnes looked at the knife and laughed. "Iron? You think iron will protect you here?" She reached out with impossible speed and grasped the blade with her bare hand. Where it should have cut her, the metal instead began to rust and corrode before our eyes, crumbling to dust in Marcus's hand. Marcus stumbled back, his face ashen. "Choose," Agnes commanded. "One stays, two go, or I'll let my children decide, and they're not as discriminating as I am. They'd keep parts of each of you." I looked at my friends, saw the same terror in their eyes that must have been in mine. This couldn't be happening. It was a dream, a hallucination brought on by altitude sickness, or perhaps those strange purple mushrooms had released spores that caused vivid hallucinations. But the cold dread in my gut told me this was real. "I'll stay," Ethan said suddenly. "Ethan, no!" I grabbed his arm. He shook me off. "It's the only way, Thomas. Get Marcus out of here." Agnes clapped her hands in delight, the sound unnaturally loud in the confined space. "Noble. I like that. It's been so long since I've had someone with spirit." "How do we know you'll let us go if he stays?" Marcus demanded. Agnes's smile vanished, replaced by a look of ancient malevolence. "You don't, but it's the only chance you have." The door behind us creaked open, revealing not the misty forest, but a clear view of the trail we had lost hours ago. "Go now, before I change my mind," Agnes hissed. Marcus grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the door. "We have to go, Thomas. We'll get help." I resisted, looking back at Ethan. His face was pale but determined. "Go," he mouthed. The scratching and tapping outside intensified, and I caught glimpses of twisted, elongated shapes moving in the mist, things with too many limbs and not enough features to be human. With a cry of anguish, I let Marcus drag me through the door. We stumbled onto the trail, the door slamming shut behind us with such force that the entire cabin shook. And then, before our eyes, the structure began to fade, growing transparent until it vanished completely, leaving only undisturbed forest where it had stood. "Ethan!" I screamed, running back to the spot, clawing at the empty air where the door had been. "Ethan!" But he was gone. The cabin was gone. There was only forest, with no sign that anything had ever been there. Marcus pulled me away. "We have to get off this mountain. Now." We ran down the trail, which was suddenly clear and obvious, as if it had never been obscured. Our GPS devices sprang back to life, showing our exact location on Humphreys Peak. My watch began ticking again, showing the correct time as if it had never stopped. We didn't stop running until we reached the Snowball parking area and Marcus's SUV. Only then, as we collapsed against the vehicle, gasping for breath, did we allow ourselves to speak of what had happened. "We need to call the Rangers," I panted. "Tell them about Ethan, about that woman." Marcus looked at me with haunted eyes. "And tell them what, exactly? That an impossibly old witch in a disappearing cabin took our friend? That the forest itself seemed to change around us? They'll think we're insane, or that we did something to Ethan." He was right, I knew. Our story was unbelievable. But we couldn't just leave Ethan. We compromised by reporting him missing, telling the authorities a sanitized version of events, that we had become separated during our hike and Ethan never made it back to the rendezvous point. Search and rescue teams combed the mountain for days but found no trace of him. 3 weeks later, Ethan walked out of the forest at the Snowball parking area. A hiker found him, naked and incoherent, his body covered in those same strange symbols we had seen carved into the trees, but these were carved into his flesh. He was taken to Flagstaff Medical Center, where doctors diagnosed him with severe dehydration, malnutrition, and what they called acute stress-induced psychosis. Marcus and I visited him as soon as we were allowed. What we found wasn't Ethan, not really. The physical resemblance was there, but his eyes were different, empty, dead. He didn't recognize us, didn't speak at all, except to mutter fragments of that same strange language we had heard outside my tent that night. The doctors said he might recover with time and treatment. He never did. After 6 months in the psychiatric ward with no improvement, his parents transferred him to a private facility in California. I visited once. He was still the same, a hollow shell of the friend I had known. As I prepared to leave, the nurse mentioned how Ethan never slept, would just stare at the ceiling all night, muttering. "Except," she added, "when there's a full moon, then he sings." "Sings?" I asked, my blood running cold. "Yes," she replied, "always the same song. None of us recognize it. Sounds old, like a folk song maybe. Strange lyrics, though." "What lyrics?" I barely managed to whisper. She frowned, trying to remember. Something about children in the mist, and a woman named Agnes. I never went back. Marcus and I don't speak anymore. He moved to Florida, as far from mountains and forests as he could get. Last I heard, he was drinking heavily and had lost his job. As for me, I still live in Phoenix, still work the same job, but nothing is the same. I can't look at forests without shaking, can't hear the wind in trees without remembering that tapping, that whispering. I see Agnes's milky eyes in my dreams, and sometimes when I wake in the dead of night, I hear that tapping on my bedroom window. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. And on full moon nights, I swear I can hear Ethan singing. I tell myself it's just trauma, just my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I know better. Agnes Blackwood is real. Her mountain is real. And sometimes I find those strange symbols drawn in the dust on my windowsill or scratched into the paint of my car. She's watching me, waiting. And I know that someday she'll come to collect what she believes is owed to her. One stays, two go. But the two who go are never truly free. Yesterday, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single page torn from an old book, covered in those same symbols, and a note in handwriting I recognized as Ethan's, though somehow changed, more angular, more alien. It said only, "She's coming for you both, one by one. The children in the mist are hungry." Tomorrow is the full moon. I've bought a ticket to Belize, a place with no mountains, no forests, just beaches and ocean as far as the eye can see. I don't know if it will be far enough. My name is Rachel Rogers and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Superstition Mountains of Arizona last summer, and I still wake up screaming most nights. "It'll be good for you," my friend Olivia had insisted. "You've been holed up in that apartment since the divorce. Nature heals, Rach." I didn't believe her, but she wasn't entirely wrong about my self-imposed isolation. After 3 years of marriage had collapsed into a stack of legal documents and the hollow echo of an empty apartment, I'd barely left except for work. Maybe a hike would help. Maybe the vastness of the outdoors would make my problems seem smaller. That's how Olivia Bailey and I ended up planning a 4-day trek through the Superstition Mountains. The name should have been our first warning. We arrived at the Peralta Trailhead on a Thursday morning in early June. The temperature forecast said it would reach 100 degrees by midday, but the morning air still held the crisp coolness of dawn as we shouldered our packs. Remember, we're taking Peralta to Fremont Saddle, then connecting to Dutchman's Trail toward Charlebois Spring, Olivia recited, studying her map. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her hiking boots already dusty from the parking lot. She'd always been the outdoorsy one between us, while I preferred the predictability of my air-conditioned office. "I've got the GPS on my phone as backup," I said, patting my pocket. "Well, don't rely on it too much. Service gets spotty out here," Olivia warned as we started up the trail. "Besides, this is about disconnecting, remember?" I nodded absently, already feeling sweat forming between my shoulder blades where my backpack pressed against my shirt. The trail started climbing immediately, winding through towering saguaro cacti and jagged volcanic formations. Despite my initial reluctance, I found myself captivated by the landscape's rugged beauty. The morning sun painted the rock formations in gold and amber hues, and every so often we'd round a bend to reveal a vista so spectacular it would halt our conversation mid-sentence. By the time we reached Fremont Saddle, 3 hours later, I was actually smiling. The panoramic view of Weaver's Needle, a towering volcanic monolith rising dramatically from the desert floor, was genuinely breathtaking. "See? I told you this would be good," Olivia said, bumping her shoulder against mine as we paused to rest. "You actually look happy for once." "Don't get used to it," I replied, but there was no bite in my words. The physical exertion had cleared my head in a way that months of therapy hadn't managed to accomplish. I pulled out my phone to take a photo of the view, frowning when I noticed I already had no signal. So much for checking in with civilization. "That's the whole point," Olivia grinned. "Now come on, we've got a lot more ground to cover before we set up camp." We continued along Dutchman's Trail, descending into a more densely vegetated area where mesquite trees and creosote bushes provided occasional patches of shade. The temperature had climbed steadily, and the water in my bottle was tepid at best. Still, there was something invigorating about being so removed from my normal life. That feeling lasted until around 3 p.m., when we encountered the old man. We'd stopped to rest at a small clearing, Olivia checking her map while I drained the last drops from my first water bottle. The trail ahead appeared to split, with neither path looking particularly well-traveled. "Peralta Basin's just a mile or so ahead," a voice called out, startling us both. He seemed to materialize from between the rocks, a wiry, sun-leathered man who looked to be in his 70s. He wore a faded denim shirt despite the heat, and a walking stick made from what appeared to be ironwood rested in his gnarled hand. His eyes were the palest blue I'd ever seen, almost colorless against his tanned skin. "Thanks," Olivia recovered first. "We're actually headed toward Charlebois Spring for the night." The man's expression shifted subtly. "Folks don't usually camp out there anymore?" "Why not?" I asked, a chill running down my spine despite the afternoon heat. "Bad water, bad dreams." He shrugged as if this explanation was sufficient. "You'd do better to head back to Peralta and find a spot before nightfall." Olivia frowned. "Our permit is for Charlebois. The guidebook says the spring is reliable, even in summer." "Guidebooks," the man spat into the dust. Written by folks who've never spent a night out here when the moon is dark." He looked up at the sky, where the sun still blazed. "You got about 4 hours of daylight left. Use 'em wisely." Before either of us could respond, he continued up the trail we'd just descended, his walking stick making soft thumps against the earth. I felt an irrational urge to call him back, to ask what exactly he meant by bad dreams. "Well, that was weird," Olivia said, watching him go. "Probably just some local trying to scare the tourists." "It worked," I admitted. "Maybe we should find somewhere else to camp." Olivia rolled her eyes. "Rachel, we planned this route specifically for the water source at Charlebois. Unless you want to carry an extra gallon on your back tomorrow, we stick to the plan." She pointed at the left fork of the trail. "This way." I hesitated for a moment, looking back at the retreating figure of the old man, then followed my friend. The encounter had left me unsettled, but I told myself it was just the usual discomfort of social anxiety, not any kind of premonition. The trail grew more difficult as the afternoon wore on. Loose scree made footing treacherous on steeper sections, and several times we had to backtrack when the path seemed to disappear entirely. My earlier good mood evaporated under the relentless sun. Even Olivia's usual cheerfulness dimmed as we repeatedly consulted her map. "We should have reached the spring by now," she muttered, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I don't understand what went wrong." "Maybe we took the wrong fork back there," I suggested, trying to keep the rising edge of panic from my voice. My water was dangerously low, and the thought of being lost in this hostile landscape as daylight waned was triggering every anxiety I'd been fighting to control. "No, I'm sure this is right," Olivia insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. She pulled out her compass, frowning at the needle. "That's weird." "What?" "The compass. It's acting strange." She tapped the face of the instrument, then moved a few feet to the left. "It keeps jumping around." I took out my phone, hoping against hope for a signal. There wasn't one, but what alarmed me more was that the GPS app couldn't seem to pinpoint our location. The blue dot representing our position kept jumping erratically across the map. "Olivia," I said quietly, "I think we should go back." She looked at me, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw real fear in her eyes. "Yeah, okay." We turned around trying to retrace our steps, but nothing looked familiar. The afternoon shadows had lengthened, transforming the landscape into something alien and threatening. Rock formations that had seemed picturesque in the morning now loomed like crouching predators. The quiet that had earlier seemed peaceful now felt watchful, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. After an hour of increasingly desperate wandering, we stumbled upon a small canyon that opened into a relatively flat area bordered by cliff walls. A trickle of water seeped from a crack in the rock face, forming a small, stagnant pool. "This has to be it," Olivia said, though we both knew this pathetic seep couldn't be the reliable spring described in her guidebook. "We should set up camp before we lose the light completely." I nodded, too exhausted and frightened to argue. We pitched our tent in silence, the growing darkness making the task more difficult. By the time we'd finished, the first stars were appearing overhead. "We'll filter water from the seep and figure this out in the morning," Olivia said as we huddled next to our small camp stove, waiting for our freeze-dried meals to rehydrate. "The trail can't be far. Did you notice we haven't seen any other hikers since that old man?" I asked, my voice sounding small in the vast darkness. Olivia didn't answer immediately. "It's not a popular trail this time of year," she finally said. "Too hot." We ate without enthusiasm, the food tasting like cardboard in my dry mouth. Despite our rationing, we barely had enough water to last until morning, even with the meager seep. As we prepared for sleep, an unnatural silence descended. No insects chirping, no rustling of nocturnal creatures, just the soft moan of wind through the canyon. "I'm sorry I dragged you out here," Olivia whispered as we lay in our tent. "This isn't how it was supposed to go." "It's not your fault," I replied, though part of me wanted to blame her for our predicament. "We'll find our way back tomorrow." I don't know which of us fell asleep first, but I know exactly when I woke up. My watch read 2:17 a.m. when the screaming started. It came from somewhere up the canyon, a high, inhuman wail that raised every hair on my body. It wasn't an animal sound, at least not any animal I recognized. It held too much intention. Pain and rage and hunger all twisted together into a sound that had no place in this world. "What the fuck is that?" Olivia gasped, fully awake beside me. Before I could answer, the scream came again, closer this time. Then another answered it from the opposite direction. "Mountain lions," I whispered, knowing even as I said it that this was nothing so ordinary. "We need to stay in the tent," Olivia said, her voice shaking. "Whatever it is, it'll pass by." But the screams continued, moving around us in a tightening circle. I clutched my small camping knife, knowing how useless it would be against whatever was out there. Minutes stretched into an eternity as we huddled together, listening to the inhuman voices conversing in the darkness. Then, abruptly, silence fell again. The absolute stillness was somehow worse than the screaming had been. "Maybe they," Olivia began. Something brushed against the side of our tent. Not the wind, not a branch, something deliberate. A slow, heavy movement that dragged along the thin fabric from one end to the other. Then a voice. So close it could have been inside the tent with us. "I can smell your fear." The words were English, but the voice wasn't human. It was wet and thick, as if speaking through a mouthful of saliva. Each syllable sounded painful, as if human speech was an unnatural contortion for whatever spoke. Olivia whimpered beside me, her entire body trembling. I remained frozen, unable to even breathe. "So sweet," the voice continued. "Just like the last ones." Something sharp punctured the tent wall, slicing downward with agonizing slowness. Moonlight spilled through the widening gap, but it illuminated nothing outside. Just darkness, deeper than the night around it. Come out," the voice sang, a grotesque parody of a childhood taunt. Olivia moved suddenly, lunging for the tent zipper on the opposite side. "Run!" she screamed, tearing open the door and tumbling outside. I was right behind her, blind panic giving me speed I didn't know I possessed. We sprinted away from the tent, away from the voice, with no direction in mind except away. The moon provided just enough light to avoid the largest obstacles, but we stumbled constantly over rocks and brush. Behind us came sounds of pursuit. Not footsteps, but a slithering, dragging noise that was somehow faster than our desperate flight. And the screams had started again, calling to each other from all around us. "The cliff!" Olivia gasped, pointing ahead. "We can climb!" Her words cut off in a choked cry as something yanked her backward into the darkness. One moment she was running beside me, The next, she was gone, her scream blending with the inhuman wails that surrounded us. "Olivia!" I turned back, my friend's name torn from my throat. In the faint moonlight, I caught a glimpse of what had her, a shape that made no sense to my eyes, all wrong angles and too many limbs, hunched over Olivia's thrashing form. Then other shapes moved in, converging on her from all sides. I should have tried to help her. I know that now. But in that moment, blind terror took control, and I ran. Her screams followed me, becoming more and more distorted until they didn't sound human at all. I found a narrow crevice in the cliff face and wedged myself into it, making myself as small as possible. From my hiding place, I could see the area where Olivia had fallen. The shapes moved around her in a frenzy, their bodies blocking and then revealing her in glimpses. Then they began to drag her away, back toward our campsite. Just before they disappeared from view, Olivia turned her head in my direction. Even in the dim light, I could see that her eyes were open, aware, seeing me, knowing I had abandoned her. I stayed in that crevice until dawn, shaking uncontrollably, my mind unable to process what I'd witnessed. When the first gray light of morning revealed an empty, ordinary desert landscape, I finally emerged on wobbling legs. Our campsite was undisturbed. The tent stood exactly as we'd left it, with no sign of the tear I'd seen in the dark. Our backpacks rested where we'd placed them the night before. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no indication that anything had happened at all, and no sign of Olivia. "Olivia," I called, my voice cracking. "Olivia." Only the canyon walls answered, throwing my voice back at me in mocking echoes. I searched frantically around the camp, then ventured out in widening circles, calling her name until my throat was raw. The morning grew hotter, the sun climbing relentlessly into a cloudless sky, but I kept searching. It was near noon when I found her backpack nearly a mile from our campsite, wedged between two boulders. Her water bottle, half full, was still in the side pocket. Her phone was inside, its battery completely drained despite having been nearly full the day before. But of Olivia herself, there was nothing. Logic told me to hike out, to find help, to bring back a search party. But logic had no place in this nightmare. My instincts screamed that darkness would bring those things back, and I couldn't be here when it did. I took Olivia's water and what food I could carry, abandoned everything else, and began walking in what I hoped was the direction of the trailhead. Hours passed in a haze of heat and fear. I followed dry creek beds, hoping they would lead to larger waterways and eventually civilization. My thoughts grew increasingly disjointed as dehydration set in. Several times I thought I heard Olivia calling my name, but when I turned, there was only the whispering wind. Late in the afternoon, I crested a rise and saw a figure standing on the trail ahead. Relief flooded through me until I recognized the old man from the day before, still leaning on his ironwood walking stick. "I told you not to camp at Charlebois," he said, his voice carrying easily across the distance between us. "They always find the ones who sleep there." I stumbled toward him, desperation overcoming my fear. "My friend, something took her. We need to get help." He shook his head slowly. "She's not your friend anymore." "What are you talking about? We have to find her. Call search and rescue. The police. Anyone." "They'll search," he agreed. "Won't find anything, though. Not until she comes back." A cold dread settled in my stomach. "Comes back?" "Oh, yes." The old man's pale eyes seemed to look through me rather than at me. "They always come back. Changed, of course, but wearing the same faces, speaking with the same voices. Except when they forget and let the other voice slip through." I backed away from him, suddenly certain that he was as dangerous as whatever had taken Olivia. "You're crazy. I'm getting out of here, getting real help." "You can try," he said, pointing with his walking stick toward a path I hadn't noticed. "Trailhead's about 4 miles that way, but she'll find you, sooner or later. They always find the ones who've seen them." I didn't wait to hear more. I ran down the path he'd indicated, driven by the desperate hope that civilization and safety lay at the end of it. To my shock, it actually did. Less than an hour later, I stumbled into the Peralta Trailhead parking lot, where my car waited exactly where we'd left it. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. As the engine roared to life, I glanced in the rearview mirror and screamed. Olivia stood at the edge of the parking lot, watching me. Even from a distance, I could tell something was wrong with her posture. Too stiff, her head cocked at an unnatural angle. She raised one hand in a wave, the movement jerky as if her joints worked differently now. I floored the accelerator, tires spitting gravel, and didn't slow down until I reached Phoenix. I went straight to the police station and reported everything. The disappearance, the strange noises, the shapes in the darkness, and Olivia at the trailhead. They were sympathetic, but skeptical. When they checked the parking lot security cameras, there was no sign of Olivia. Just me, getting into my car alone and then sitting there for nearly 5 minutes before suddenly speeding away in apparent panic. They sent a search party anyway, which found our abandoned campsite and gear, but no trace of Olivia. The official report lists her as missing in the Superstition Mountains, presumed dead from exposure or animal attack. Her parents held a memorial service 2 weeks later, which I attended despite their barely concealed blame. I couldn't tell them what really happened. I could barely admit it to myself. 3 days after the memorial, my doorbell rang at 2:17 a.m. I knew before I checked the peephole who would be standing there. Olivia looked the same as always. Blonde hair, athletic build, familiar face. But when she smiled, too many teeth showed, and her eyes reflected the porch light like an animal's. "Aren't you going to invite me in, Rachel?" she asked, her voice almost right but with something else underneath it. Something wet and thick that made each word sound painful. "We never finished our hike. Don't you want to come back to the mountains with me? The others are waiting to meet you." I called the police, but by the time they arrived, she was gone. They found no fingerprints on the doorbell, no footprints in the soft earth of my flower bed, nothing to prove she had been there at all. They suggested grief and trauma were causing hallucinations. Maybe they're right. That would be better than the alternative. That she really was there, that she isn't Olivia anymore, and that one day she'll stop asking and simply take me back to the Superstition Mountains, to the others waiting in the dark. I've moved 3 times since then, changed my phone number, deleted my social media accounts, but it doesn't matter. Last night my new doorbell rang at exactly 2:17 a.m. I didn't answer. I haven't slept, and I'm writing this now as a warning. Stay away from Charlevoix Spring in the Superstition Mountains. Don't camp there, no matter what your map or guidebook says, because the things that live there are hungry, and they wear the faces of the people they take, and they never, ever stop hunting once they've caught your scent. And if you see a woman named Olivia Bailey on the trails, blonde hair, athletic build, too many teeth when she smiles, run. Run, and don't look back, because I'll be with her by then. My name is Benjamin Collins, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Mazatzal wilderness of Arizona just last summer. I still can't sleep through the night. I'd always been a city guy. Growing up in Phoenix, my idea of roughing it was a hotel without room service. But when my best friend Marcus suggested a guy's weekend hiking trip, I surprised myself by agreeing. Maybe it was the 3 beers I'd had, or maybe it was the crushing weight of my recent divorce from Elaine after 8 years of marriage. Either way, I found myself packing a borrowed backpack with supplies I barely knew how to use. "You're gonna love it, Ben," Marcus had insisted, his eyes lighting up with genuine excitement. The Mazatzal Mountains are incredible this time of year. Remote, peaceful, exactly what you need to clear your head. Marcus had always been the outdoorsy one of our friend group. Athletic, confident, with the kind of rugged good looks that made women notice him even when he wasn't trying. The complete opposite of me with my desk job and expanding waistline. Our third companion, Darren, fell somewhere in between, an accountant by trade but with enough camping experience to make him useful. Just don't expect cell service, Darren had warned me with a chuckle. The Mazatzal wilderness is seriously off-grid. I should have taken that as my first warning. We started our hike from the Barnhart trailhead on a crisp June morning. The sun was bright, the air was clear, and my pack already felt too heavy after the first mile. The trail climbed steeply through juniper and pine, with breathtaking views of canyons and distant peaks. Despite my aching shoulders, I had to admit the scenery was worth it. "There's a spot near Chilson's Spring where we can camp tonight," Marcus announced as we stopped for lunch on a rocky outcrop. "It's about 6 more miles, but we'll have water and a great view." Darren nodded in agreement while checking his GPS device. "Should be perfect. Weather's holding too." I took a long drink from my water bottle and stared out at the vastness of the wilderness. So different from the gridlocked streets and crowded buildings I was used to, I couldn't decide if the isolation was peaceful or unnerving. "You hanging in there, divorce boy?" Marcus asked, giving me a friendly punch on the arm. "Yeah," I managed to smile. "Just not used to carrying my life on my back." "You'll get your trail legs," he assured me. "By tomorrow, you won't even notice the pack." I seriously doubted that, but I appreciated his encouragement. The afternoon hike was more challenging as the trail grew steeper and narrower. I found myself breathless, lagging behind my friends. They would stop occasionally, waiting for me to catch up, but I could see their impatience. The shadows lengthened as the day wore on, and I began to worry we wouldn't reach our campsite before dark. "How much farther?" I called ahead, embarrassed by the whine in my voice. "Just around this ridge," Marcus called back, "maybe half a mile." I forced myself to keep moving, one foot in front of the other. When we finally reached the small clearing near Chilson's Spring, I practically collapsed onto a fallen log, my legs trembling with exhaustion. "See? Told you it was worth it," Marcus grinned, gesturing at the panoramic view of the wilderness below us. And it was spectacular. The setting sun painted the ridges and valleys in shades of gold and purple, with shadow-filled canyons creating a dramatic patchwork across the landscape. In the far distance, the lights of some small town twinkled like earthbound stars. We set up camp efficiently, or rather, Marcus and Darren did while I fumbled with tent poles and tried to be useful. By the time we had a small fire going, night had fallen completely, wrapping us in a darkness deeper than anything I'd experienced in the city. The stars overhead were unnervingly bright and numerous, like watching the universe through new eyes. "Man, I needed this," Darren sighed contentedly as we sat around the fire, roasting hot dogs on sticks. "Work's been kicking my ass lately." "Nothing like the mountains to put things in perspective," Marcus agreed, taking a swig from his flask before passing it to me. The whiskey burned pleasantly going down, warming me from the inside. We talked into the night, the way old friends do, about jobs, relationships, dreams we'd once had and forgotten. For the first time since signing my divorce papers, I felt something like peace, if only it had lasted. I was the first to hear it, a sound so faint I initially thought I'd imagined it. A whisper carried on the night breeze, too distant to make out words but distinctly human. "Did you hear that?" I interrupted Darren's story about his nightmare client. Both men fell silent, listening. "Hear what?" Marcus finally asked. "I thought I heard, like a whisper or something." Darren glanced around the darkness beyond our fire. "Probably just the wind in the trees." "Yeah," I agreed, embarrassed. "Probably." But when it came again a few minutes later, I saw Marcus stiffen slightly. This time, the sound was clearer. A faint, sing-song voice, the words indistinguishable but the tone unmistakably female. "Okay, that was definitely something," Marcus admitted. "Could be hikers at another campsite," Darren suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. Marcus shook his head. "Not likely. This trail doesn't get much traffic, especially midweek, and the nearest established campsite is at least 3 miles from here." The knowledge that we were probably the only people for miles around suddenly made the vast wilderness feel suffocating. I found myself straining to hear the voice again, both dreading and expecting its return. "Let's check the map," Marcus said, pulling out his trail guide. "Maybe there's a ranger station or something nearby that would explain it." But, according to the map, we were deep in the wilderness area, far from any ranger stations or maintained facilities. The nearest town, a tiny place called Pine, was over 15 miles away as the crow flies, and much farther by trail. "Maybe it carried from somewhere else," I suggested, not really believing it myself. "Sound does weird things in mountains, right?" Neither of my friends bothered responding to this flimsy rationalization. The whispers didn't return that night, but I slept poorly, jerking awake at every rustle of wind through the pines or scurrying of small nocturnal animals. When I finally drifted into deeper sleep near dawn, I dreamed of a woman in a white dress, standing among the trees at the edge of our camp, her face hidden in shadow as she called my name in a voice that sounded disturbingly like Elaine's. I awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Darren and Marcus talking quietly by the rekindled fire. Sunlight filtered through the pine branches overhead, making the previous night's uneasiness seem foolish in the bright morning light. "Morning, sleeping beauty," Darren called as I crawled out of my tent. "Coffee?" I gratefully accepted the steaming cup, wincing as I straightened up. Every muscle in my body protested the previous day's exertion. "So, what's the plan for today?" I asked, trying to sound enthusiastic despite my aching body. Marcus spread the map on a flat rock. "I was thinking we'd hike up to Mazatzal Peak, then loop back to camp by evening. It's about 8 miles round trip, but the views are incredible." Before I could voice my concerns about another day of strenuous hiking, a strange noise from the woods behind us made all three of us turn sharply. It was a cracking sound, like a heavy footstep on a dry branch, followed by what sounded like a child's giggle. We exchanged glances, silently confirming we'd all heard it. "Hello?" Marcus called out loudly. "Someone there?" No response came, just the ordinary sounds of the forest in morning. Birds, wind, distant water. "I'll check it out," Darren volunteered, setting down his coffee mug. "I'll come with you," I said quickly, not wanting to be left alone. We walked toward the sound, pushing through underbrush and scanning between trees. The forest looked peaceful and ordinary in the morning light, showing no signs of intrusion. After a few minutes of fruitless searching, we returned to camp. "Nothing," Darren reported to Marcus. "Not even disturbed branches or footprints." "Weird," Marcus frowned, "but it was probably just an animal. Maybe a raccoon or something." I didn't mention that it had sounded nothing like an animal to me. We packed day packs for our hike, securing the campsite before heading out. The trail to Mazatzal Peak was even more challenging than the previous day's hike, with steep switchbacks and rocky terrain that required careful footing. But the rhythm of walking and the bright sunshine helped push away the lingering unease from the night before. By midday, we'd reached a spectacular viewpoint just below the peak. The vista was genuinely breathtaking. Miles of wilderness spread out before us, the land falling away in dramatic canyons and rising again in distant mountains. We ate lunch on sun-warmed rocks, pointing out landmarks and taking photos. It was on the return journey that things began to change. First, it was the weather. Though the morning had been clear, clouds now gathered with unnatural speed, dark and heavy with the promise of rain. The temperature dropped noticeably, and a cold wind picked up, sending pine needles skittering across the trail. "Looks like a storm's coming in," Marcus observed, glancing at the sky with a frown. "We should pick up the pace." Then came the disorientation. Darren, who had been confidently leading us with his GPS device, suddenly stopped at a fork in the trail, looking confused. "That's weird," he muttered, tapping at the screen. "According to this, we should be heading that way." He pointed to the left fork, "but I could swear we came from the other direction this morning." "Let me see." Marcus took the device, studying it with narrowed eyes. "Battery's low. Maybe it's glitching." "I've got the paper map," I offered, digging it from my pack. But the map seemed suddenly incomprehensible, the marked trails not matching what we were seeing in front of us. What had seemed like a straightforward out-and-back hike that morning now felt like navigating a labyrinth. "Let's just go with our gut," Marcus decided after we debated for several increasingly tense minutes. "I'm pretty sure it's the right fork." We continued, but my sense of unease grew with each step. The forest around us seemed different somehow. The trees closer together, the underbrush thicker, the birdsongs fewer. I found myself glancing over my shoulder repeatedly, unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Anyone else feel like we're going in circles?" Darren finally voiced what I'd been thinking. We stopped again, Marcus checking the compass on his watch while Darren tried to revive his now dead GPS. "This doesn't make sense," Marcus muttered. "We should have reached the campsite by now." "Maybe we took a wrong turn somewhere," I suggested, trying to keep the rising panic from my voice. "There weren't that many turns to take," Darren responded, frustration evident in his tone. The first drops of rain began to fall, pattering on the leaves overhead. Within minutes, it had developed into a steady downpour, soaking through our light jackets and making the trail slippery and treacherous. "We need to find shelter and wait this out," Marcus decided as thunder rumbled ominously in the distance. We left the trail, heading for a cluster of large pines that offered some protection from the rain. Setting our packs under the densest part of the canopy, we huddled together, watching the forest disappear behind sheets of water. "At least we've got supplies," Darren tried to sound optimistic. "Worst-case scenario, we spend the night here and find our way back in the morning." The thought of spending the night away from our campsite, without tents or sleeping bags, was far from comforting. But I nodded anyway, trying to appear braver than I felt. The storm raged for over an hour, the thunder growing closer and more violent. Lightning flashed, momentarily turning the gloomy forest as bright as day. It was during one of these flashes that I saw her for the first time. She stood about 50 yards away, partially hidden behind a tree trunk, a woman with long, dark hair, wearing what looked like a simple white dress that was somehow untouched by the rain. Though I couldn't make out her features clearly, I had the distinct impression she was staring directly at me. When the forest plunged back into dimness, I blinked rapidly, convinced I'd imagined her. But when the next lightning flash came, she was closer, maybe 30 yards away now, standing in plain view among the rain-lashed trees. "Guys," I hissed, grabbing Marcus's arm. "Look, there's someone there." Both men followed my pointing finger, but the forest had darkened again. We waited, tense and silent, for the next lightning strike. When it came, illuminating the woods in stark white light, the woman was gone. "I don't see anyone, Ben," Marcus said gently, as if speaking to a frightened child. "She was right there," I insisted. "A woman in a white dress." Darren and Marcus exchanged a look I didn't like, concern mixed with skepticism. "Maybe it was just branches moving in the wind," Darren suggested. "The lightning can play tricks on your eyes." I knew what I'd seen, but I also knew how it sounded. City guy gets spooked in the woods, starts seeing things. I shut my mouth and wrapped my arms around my knees, trying to stop shivering. When the rain finally slackened to a drizzle, we gathered our wet gear and continued our attempt to find the campsite. The forest had grown darker as evening approached, the dense clouds blocking what little sunlight remained in the day. "We've got maybe an hour of usable light left," Marcus assessed grimly. "If we don't find camp by then, we'll have to improvise for the night." We pressed on, moving as quickly as the slippery conditions allowed. The trail seemed to shift and wind in ways none of us remembered from the morning. Familiar landmarks were nowhere to be seen. "Wait," Darren suddenly called out, stopping short. "Listen." We froze, straining our ears. At first, I heard nothing beyond the gentle patter of raindrops on leaves. Then it came, a soft, melodic humming, floating through the trees from somewhere ahead of us. "Hello," Marcus shouted. "Is someone there? We could use some help." The humming stopped abruptly. "Hello," he called again. After a pause, a woman's voice responded, so faint we could barely make it out. This way? Relief flooded through me. Another hiker, maybe? Or a park ranger who'd seen our unattended campsite and come looking for us. Should we follow? Darren asked uncertainly. Do we have a choice? I countered. We're lost. It's getting dark, and someone out there seems to know where they're going. Marcus nodded decisively. Let's go, but stay together. We moved toward where we thought the voice had come from, occasionally calling out for guidance. Each time the response came, this way, always just ahead, always just out of sight. The trail began to slope downward, taking us into a narrow ravine I was certain we hadn't passed through before. The trees grew denser here, old growth pines with massive trunks and branches that interlaced overhead, blocking what little light remained. The ground was covered in a thick carpet of pine needles that muffled our footsteps. This doesn't feel right, Darren murmured, voicing the doubt we all felt. But the voice called again. Almost there, and we continued, like moths drawn to a fatal flame. The ravine opened into a small clearing, and there in the center stood a cabin I could have sworn hadn't been on any of our maps. It was an old structure, its log walls weathered gray with a sagging porch and small windows that reflected the last of the daylight. A thin wisp of smoke curled from the stone chimney. Hello, Marcus called out cautiously as we approached. We're lost hikers. Could you help us? The cabin door creaked open, and a woman stepped onto the porch. She was elderly, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, dressed in a faded floral dress and cardigan that seemed from another era. Her face was deeply lined, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that caught what little light there was in an unnerving way. Well now, she said, her voice raspy yet somehow familiar. Isn't this a stroke of luck? Lost in the storm, were you? Come in before you catch your deaths. We hesitated. There was something off about the woman, about the entire situation. But the alternatives, spending the night lost in the increasingly dark forest or continuing to wander in hopes of finding our camp, seemed worse. Thank you, Marcus finally responded, taking a step forward. We really appreciate it. I'm Marcus, and these are my friends, Darren and Benjamin. Agnes, the woman replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Agnes Blackwood. Don't just stand there getting wet, boys. Come inside. The interior of the cabin was dimly lit by oil lamps and a fire that crackled in a stone hearth. It was a single room with rough wooden furniture, a table, some chairs, a rocking chair near the fire, and a narrow bed in the corner. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, filling the air with an odd, bitter scent. The walls were decorated with strange objects, animal skulls, feathered dream catchers, and what looked disturbingly like human teeth strung together as a macabre necklace. Set your wet things by the fire, Agnes instructed, moving toward a pot that bubbled on a small wood stove. I've got stew keeping warm. You boys must be hungry. My stomach responded with an embarrassing growl. Despite the strange surroundings, the thought of hot food was irresistible. That's very kind, Darren said, carefully removing his wet jacket. We didn't expect to find anyone out here. Oh, the Mazatzal wilderness is full of surprises, Agnes chuckled, the sound like dry leaves rustling. Been living here nearly 40 years now, ever since my Harold passed. 40 years. Marcus raised his eyebrows, hanging his soggy pack on a hook by the door. That's impressive. I didn't think there were any permanent residents this deep in the wilderness area. Official records don't know everything, young man, Agnes replied with a wink. Now sit. Food's ready. We arranged ourselves at the rough wooden table while Agnes ladled thick stew into chipped ceramic bowls. The stew smelled amazing, rich with meat and herbs, making my mouth water despite my lingering unease. What brings you boys to this part of the mountains? Agnes asked as she placed the bowls before us. Not many hikers come through this particular valley. We were camping near Chilson Spring, Marcus explained. Took a day hike to Mazatzal Peak, but got turned around on the way back when the storm hit. Ah, Chilson Spring. Agnes nodded knowingly. Pretty spot, but tricky country around there. The Mazatzals don't always want visitors, you know. Sometimes the mountains change to confuse those who don't belong. I paused with my spoon halfway to my mouth. What do you mean, change? Agnes's eyes fixed on me with unexpected intensity. I mean exactly what I said, Benjamin. These mountains are old. They have their own ways, their own rules. They protect what's theirs. The unsettling way she emphasized my name sent a chill down my spine. I didn't recall Marcus introducing me by my full name. Excellent stew, Darren commented, either not noticing or choosing to ignore the strange tension. Is this venison? Something like that, Agnes smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. Special recipe. As we ate, Agnes told stories of the mountains, tales of lost hikers, strange lights seen at night, voices on the wind that led travelers astray. With each story, my appetite diminished, though my companions seemed unaffected, clearing their bowls and accepting seconds. There was a young couple last summer, Agnes was saying, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Came up from Phoenix for a romantic getaway. They set up camp not far from here. The girl heard singing in the night, beautiful, irresistible singing. She followed it, leaving her boyfriend sleeping. They found pieces of her 3 months later, scattered across 5 miles of wilderness. That's horrible, I managed, pushing my half-eaten stew away. Is it? Agnes tilted her head, studying me. Or is it just the natural order of things? Prey and predator. The mountains take what they want. Outside, the wind had picked up, howling around the cabin's corners and making the windows rattle in their frames. The fire in the hearth seemed to respond, flaring suddenly higher, casting elongated shadows that danced across the walls. It's getting late, Agnes observed, though there was no clock in the cabin that I could see. And that storm's not letting up. You boys should stay the night. The suggestion sent a jolt of panic through me. Every instinct screamed that we needed to leave this place, storm or no storm. That's very generous, Marcus responded politely. But we should try to get back to our campsite. Our gear is there, and people will worry if we don't check in. Agnes's smile tightened. No one checks in from Chilson Spring, young man. No cell service for 20 miles, and in this weather, with night falling, you wouldn't make it a mile before getting hopelessly lost. She leaned forward, her voice softening to something almost seductive. Stay. I insist. The way she said it left no room for argument. I glanced at Darren, hoping to see my own alarm reflected on his face, but he looked oddly calm, almost dazed. Marcus, too, seemed unnaturally relaxed, his earlier determination to return to camp apparently forgotten. Well, if you're sure it's no trouble, Marcus finally said, smiling gratefully at our host. No trouble at all, Agnes assured him, standing to clear the bowls. I so rarely have company these days. As she moved around the table, I noticed something I hadn't before. Her feet made no sound on the wooden floor. None at all. And when she passed between me and one of the oil lamps, her shadow seemed wrong somehow. Not the shape of an elderly woman, but something taller, more angular, with what looked like antlers sprouting from the head. I blinked hard, convinced I was seeing things. When I looked again, her shadow appeared normal. But the seed of terror had been planted and was rapidly taking root. Actually, I said abruptly, standing up, I think we should go. Thank you for the meal and the shelter, but we really need to get back to our camp. Agnes turned to me, her expression hardening. Sit down, Benjamin. Ben's right, Marcus suddenly agreed, seeming to shake off whatever spell had momentarily claimed him. We appreciate your hospitality, but we should try to make it back tonight. Only Darren remained seated, staring into his empty bowl with a vacant expression. Darren? Marcus nudged him. Come on, man, we're leaving. Darren looked up slowly, his eyes unfocused. I think we should stay, he murmured. Agnes has been so kind." "Yes, listen to your friend," Agnes purred, moving toward Darren and placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's dangerous out there. Safe in here." I grabbed my jacket from beside the fire, no longer caring that it was still damp. "We're going, now. Darren, get up." Marcus joined me, collecting his pack. "Come on, Darren, this isn't a debate." Agnes's face contorted with sudden fury, the lines deepening into crevices that shouldn't have been possible on a human face. "You will not leave," she screeched, her voice transforming into something inhuman, multiple voices layered together, echoing in the small cabin. The fire flared again, this time shooting up the chimney with such force that sparks showered into the room. The oil lamps flickered wildly, casting the cabin into alternating brightness and shadow. In those flashes, I caught glimpses of Agnes's true form. No longer an elderly woman, but something ancient and twisted. Her fingers elongating into claws, her spine curving wrongly, her face stretching into a muzzle filled with needle-like teeth. Marcus saw it too. He yelled, grabbing Darren by the arm and yanking him to his feet. "Run!" We bolted for the door, Darren stumbling between us as if drugged. I wrenched the door open and we spilled out onto the porch, into the cold rain and howling wind. Behind us, Agnes, or whatever she truly was, let out a sound that was part scream, part animal howl. "The woods!" Marcus shouted over the storm. "Quick!" We ran blindly into the forest, slipping on wet pine needles and crashing through underbrush. The darkness was nearly complete now, but fear drove us forward, away from the cabin and the monstrous thing that dwelled within it. How long we ran, I couldn't say. The forest blurred around us, trees looming out of the darkness like sentinels. The rain continued to pour, soaking us to the skin and chilling us to the bone. Several times we fell, scrambling back to our feet with increasing desperation. Finally, when our legs would carry us no further, we collapsed beneath a large pine, gasping for breath. "What the hell was that?" I managed between heaving breaths. "I don't know," Marcus replied, his voice trembling. "Some kind of witch? Skinwalker? Whatever it wasn't human." Darren sat silently, his eyes clearer now but filled with horror. "The stew," he whispered. "There was something in the stew. I felt so strange after eating it, like my thoughts weren't my own." "You ate more than we did," Marcus realized. "That's why you were more affected." I leaned back against the tree trunk, trying to calm my racing heart. "We need to get out of these mountains. First light, we find a trail, any trail, and we hike out. Forget the campsite, forget our gear. We just go." Both men nodded in grim agreement. "For now, we need to stay warm, somehow," Marcus assessed, always the practical one despite his obvious fear. "If we keep moving, we'll stay warmer and put more distance between us and her." We got to our feet, supporting each other as we began walking again, more slowly this time, but with purpose. The storm was beginning to ease, the rain reducing to a light drizzle. Through breaks in the clouds, a quarter moon occasionally peeked through, providing brief moments of silvery illumination. It was during one such moment of moonlight that we saw the standing stones, a rough circle of tall, weathered monoliths that seemed to spring directly from the forest floor. They hadn't been visible until we were almost upon them, as if they had materialized from the darkness itself. "What is this place?" Darren whispered, stopping short. None of us had any answer. The stone circle wasn't marked on any of our maps, and I was certain no official trail guides mentioned such a significant archaeological feature in the Mazatzal wilderness. "Let's go around," I suggested, not liking the ancient, watchful feel of the stones. But as we tried to skirt the circle, the forest seemed to thicken impossibly, forcing us back toward the stones. It was as if the woods themselves were herding us, like cattle to slaughter. "I don't think we have a choice," Marcus finally said, his voice tight with controlled fear. "We have to go through." Reluctantly, we entered the circle through a gap between two of the largest monoliths. Inside, the ground was surprisingly clear of underbrush, covered instead with a carpet of moss that seemed to glow faintly in the sporadic moonlight. At the center of the circle stood a flat stone altar, its surface stained dark with what I desperately hoped was not blood. "We need to get out of here," Darren hissed, grabbing my arm with trembling fingers. "Now!" But even as he spoke, a wind rose. Not the natural wind of the storm, but a concentrated whirlwind that swept around the perimeter of the stone circle, effectively trapping us inside. The moss beneath our feet began to glow brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. And then the whispering started. Voices, dozens of them, men and women and children, all speaking at once in languages I didn't recognize. They seemed to come from the stones themselves, ancient voices awakening from long silence. "What's happening?" I shouted over the rising wind, but my voice sounded muffled, as if the air itself was thickening. The moonlight disappeared behind racing clouds, plunging us into darkness broken only by the pulsing glow of the moss. In that eerie light, I saw forms beginning to materialize around us, translucent, humanoid shapes that flickered in and out of visibility. Some appeared to be Native Americans in traditional dress, others settlers in frontier clothing, and still others modern hikers not unlike ourselves. All had the same hollowed eyes and expressions of unspeakable suffering. One figure separated from the others, drifting toward us. As it came closer, my blood turned to ice water in my veins. It was a woman in a white dress, her long dark hair floating around her face as if she were underwater. Though her features were different, there was something in her eyes that reminded me hauntingly of Elaine. "Benjamin," she whispered, her voice somehow carrying over the howling wind. "We've been waiting for you." "Don't listen to it," Marcus shouted, pulling me back as I unconsciously stepped toward the apparition. "It's not real." "But I am real," the spectral woman countered, her voice now sounding directly in my head. "More real than the life you've been living. Your empty apartment, your meaningless job, your broken marriage. What do you have to go back to, Benjamin? Stay with us. Become part of something eternal." Her words struck at my deepest vulnerabilities, the loneliness and failure I'd been running from even before this trip. For a moment, just a moment, the offer was tempting. To leave behind the pain, the struggle, the constant disappointment of my life. "Ben," Darren's voice broke through my trance. "Fight it!" The ghostly woman's face contorted with rage as my friends pulled me back. Around us, the other spirits began to move closer, their forms becoming more solid, more threatening. "They belong to us now," the woman in white hissed, her beautiful face stretching into something inhuman. "The mountains have chosen them." "Like hell we do," Marcus spat, suddenly pulling something from his pocket, his emergency flare. With a quick twist, he ignited it, filling the stone circle with harsh, red light. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The spirits recoiled, their forms dissolving like mist in strong sunlight. The whirlwind faltered, creating a gap in the supernatural barrier that had trapped us. "Run!" Marcus commanded, and we did, bolting through the opening and back into the forest. Behind us, an unearthly wail rose from the stone circle, a sound of thwarted hunger and ancient rage that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. We ran until the flare guttered out, then continued by moonlight and blind instinct, putting as much distance as possible between ourselves and the stone circle. The forest around us seemed alive with malevolent watchfulness, branches reaching like grasping hands, roots rising to trip our desperate flight. Dawn found us huddled together in the hollow of a lightning-struck pine, exhausted beyond words but afraid to close our eyes. The forest looked deceptively normal in the early morning light, peaceful, beautiful even, with mist rising between the trees and birds beginning their morning songs. "We need to keep moving," Marcus said hoarsely, his face haggard with fatigue. "Find a trail, get down the mountain." We nodded mutely, too exhausted for conversation. Rising stiffly, we oriented ourselves using the rising sun and began walking downhill, figuring any trail would eventually lead to civilization. It was Darren who spotted it first, a flash of orange fabric through the trees. "Look," he pointed, new energy in his voice. "Is that—" We hurried toward it, hardly daring to hope. There, in a small clearing, was our campsite, tents still standing, gear apparently untouched, exactly as we had left it the previous morning. "This is impossible," I breathed, staring in disbelief. We were miles from here, in a completely different part of the mountains. "Maybe we got turned around in the dark," Marcus suggested, but his tone made it clear even he didn't believe this explanation. Darren was already checking his GPS device, which now miraculously had power again. "According to this, we're exactly where we're supposed to be, right by Chilson Spring." We approached the campsite cautiously, half expecting it to vanish like a mirage or transform into something sinister. But it remained solid and reassuringly ordinary. Our 3 small tents, the fire pit with its circle of stones, our bear bag hanging from a tree branch. "I don't understand," I said, dropping onto a log beside the cold fire pit. "What happened last night? Was it all some kind of shared hallucination?" Marcus knelt by the fire pit, examining the cold ashes with a troubled expression. "I don't think so. Look at our boots, caked with mud and pine needles. Our clothes are still damp. Whatever happened was real." "But how did we end up back here?" Darren asked, checking his tent with cautious movements, as if expecting something to leap out at him. We were miles away, completely lost. None of us had an answer that made sense. The mountains had somehow returned us to our starting point. But why? Was it a final cruel joke, or something else? "I vote we pack up and get the hell out of here," I said, already moving toward my tent. Neither of my friends argued. We worked quickly and silently, breaking down the campsite with an efficiency born of fear. Within 30 minutes, we had our packs ready and were studying the map for the quickest route back to the trailhead. "If we follow Barnhart Trail straight down, we should reach the parking lot in about 4 hours," Marcus said, tracing the route with his finger. "No detours, no scenic stops." We shouldered our packs and set off, moving at a brisk pace despite our exhaustion. The forest looked innocent in the morning light, but none of us were fooled. Something ancient and malevolent dwelled in these mountains, something that had nearly claimed us. The hike down was uneventful for the first 2 hours. The trail was clear and well marked, winding steadily downhill through pine forest and rocky outcroppings. We spoke little, saving our breath for hiking and keeping a wary eye on our surroundings. It was during a brief water break that Darren first noticed it, a dark smudge on his forearm just below his t-shirt sleeve. "What the hell?" he muttered, trying to rub it off. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked, coming closer to look. Darren rolled up his sleeve, revealing a pattern of dark, bruise-like marks spreading across his skin. They formed strange, angular symbols that seemed to pulse slightly when viewed from the corner of the eye. "When did this happen?" I asked, feeling a fresh wave of dread. "I don't know." Darren's voice trembled slightly. "I didn't notice it until just now." Marcus leaned in for a closer look, his face grim. "These look like brands or burns. But how—" He broke off as Darren suddenly doubled over, a cry of pain escaping his lips. "It burns," he gasped, clutching his arm. "God, it's burning from the inside." We helped him sit on a nearby rock, unscrewing a water bottle to pour cool water over the marks. It seemed to provide little relief as Darren continued to writhe in pain, the markings now visibly spreading up his arm toward his shoulder. "We need to get him to a hospital," Marcus decided, his voice tight with worry. "Fast." We abandoned our break, with Marcus and I supporting Darren between us as we hurried down the trail. His condition deteriorated rapidly. The markings spread to his chest and neck, and his skin burned with fever. Worse, he began to mutter in a language neither of us recognized, his eyes rolling back to show only whites. "Stay with us, Darren," I urged, increasingly terrified. Just a couple more miles. But Darren didn't seem to hear me. His mumblings grew more frantic, his body jerking in our grasp as if fighting an invisible attacker. And then, about a mile from the trailhead, he went completely rigid, his back arching impossibly before he collapsed limply between us. "Darren!" Marcus shouted, lowering him carefully to the ground. "Darren, can you hear me?" I pressed fingers to his neck, searching for a pulse. It was there, but faint and erratic. His breathing came in shallow gasps, and the markings now covered most of his visible skin, forming an intricate pattern of swirls and angular symbols. "We need to carry him," I said, already calculating how we could manage with our packs. Before we could act, Darren's eyes snapped open, but they weren't his eyes anymore. Instead of his normal brown irises, his eyes were solid black like pools of oil. "She is coming for you," he said in a voice that wasn't his own, deeper, resonant with a strange echoing quality. "She has marked one of you as her own. The binding is complete." "Darren, fight it," Marcus urged, gripping his friend's shoulders. "Whatever this is, you have to fight it." A smile spread across Darren's face, a terrible, knowing smile that belonged on no human countenance. "Darren is gone. His body returns to the stone circle as offering. The exchange has been made." With unnatural strength, he shoved Marcus away, sending him sprawling. Before I could react, Darren, or the thing controlling him, was on his feet, staring at me with those terrible black eyes. "She has chosen you, Benjamin Collins," it said, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. "The woman in white awaits her groom." Then, with impossible speed, Darren turned and sprinted up the trail, back toward the mountains, moving with a fluid grace that no human should possess. "Darren, stop!" I shouted, starting after him. Marcus caught my arm, holding me back. "That's not Darren anymore, Ben. You saw his eyes." "We can't just let him go," I argued, struggling against his grip. "If we follow him back up there, we're playing right into their hands," Marcus countered, his face pale but determined. "We need help. Professional help. Forest Service, police, someone who knows these mountains." I knew he was right, but the thought of abandoning Darren to whatever supernatural force had claimed him felt like the worst kind of betrayal. "We'll come back for him," Marcus promised, correctly reading my expression. "With help? But if we go after him now, we'll just end up like him. Or worse." Reluctantly, I nodded, and we continued down the trail at a near run, desperate to reach civilization and summon aid. The final mile seemed endless, each bend in the trail taunting us with the promise of the trailhead, only to reveal more wilderness. When we finally broke out of the forest to the gravel parking lot where we'd left Marcus's truck, the relief was overwhelming. The normality of it, the dusty vehicle, the information board with its faded maps, the trash can overflowing with energy bar wrappers, seemed almost surreal after what we'd experienced. Marcus fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking as he unlocked the truck. We threw our packs in the bed and climbed in, both of us jumping at the mundane sound of the doors slamming shut. "Cell service?" I asked as Marcus started the engine. He checked his phone, then shook his head. "Not yet. We need to get down to the main road." We bounced down the rough access road, the truck's suspension protesting every rut and pothole. Neither of us spoke, processing the horror of what had happened to Darren. I kept seeing his face, that inhuman smile, those oil-black eyes, and the strange symbols spreading across his skin like a parasitic infection. When Marcus's phone finally chimed with an incoming signal, we pulled over immediately. He dialed 911, his voice terse as he reported a medical emergency and missing hiker in the Mazatzal wilderness. I could tell from his careful wording that he was avoiding any mention of the supernatural elements of our experience. Wise, given that we needed to be taken seriously. The dispatcher promised to send Forest Service personnel and search and rescue teams, instructing us to meet them at the ranger station in the town of Payson. We agreed and continued our descent, both of us jumping at every shadow that crossed the road. "They're not going to believe the truth," I said after several minutes of silence. "No," Marcus agreed grimly. "They're not. So we stick to the facts they can verify. Darren showed signs of illness or delirium, ran off up the trail despite our attempts to stop him. We need search and rescue to find him before exposure or dehydration becomes critical." I nodded, understanding the strategy. "And the cabin? The stone circle?" "We give them the approximate locations as places to check, but we don't mention ghosts or skinwalkers or whatever the hell that thing in the cabin was. Just say we got separated in the storm, found shelter in an old cabin, then lost Darren this morning." It was a reasonable plan. The only plan, really, if we wanted the authorities to mount a serious search rather than dismiss us as drug-addled or delusional. But it felt wrong, like another betrayal of Darren, to sanitize the horror of what had really happened to him. At the ranger station, we were met by a team of Forest Service personnel, local police, and a volunteer search and rescue coordinator. They debriefed us separately, taking detailed notes on Darren's description, last known location, and medical symptoms. As Marcus had predicted, we kept our accounts factual and mundane, emphasizing the urgency without delving into the supernatural. "We'll have teams on the mountain within the hour," the search coordinator assured us, a capable-looking woman named Ranger Coleman. "If your friend is still on the trails, we'll find him." "And if he went off trail?" I asked, knowing all too well that Darren, or whatever had possessed him, wasn't following normal human logic. "We have experienced trackers and dogs," she replied confidently. "The recent rain actually helps us. Tracks will be clearer." I didn't have the heart to tell her that what had taken Darren might leave no tracks at all. After providing all the information we could, we were checked over by a paramedic, who insisted that we visit the local emergency room due to signs of dehydration, exposure, and in my case, an elevated heart rate that refused to calm despite rest and water. At the small Payson hospital, we were treated and held for observation, our beds in the same room providing a chance to speak privately for the first time since the ordeal began. "Do you think they'll find him?" I asked Marcus in a low voice after the nurse had left us with instructions to rest. He stared at the ceiling for a long moment before answering. "They'll find something," he finally said, "but I don't think it will be Darren. Not the Darren we know." The grim certainty in his voice matched my own fear. Whatever had happened on that mountain, whatever entity had claimed our friend, it wasn't going to release him easily, if at all. "The woman in white," I murmured, remembering the spectral figure from the stone circle and the words spoken through Darren's lips. She said she chose me, that I was to be her groom. Marcus turned to look at me, his expression troubled. "I saw how you responded to her, Ben. For a moment, you wanted to go to her." I couldn't deny it. The apparition had spoken to something deep within me. My loneliness, my sense of failure, my grief over the collapsed marriage that had left me adrift. She had offered belonging, purpose, an end to the emptiness that had been my constant companion since Elaine left. There was something about her, I admitted. Something familiar. "She played on your vulnerabilities," Marcus said firmly. "These things. Whatever they are, they know how to get inside your head. Like that Agnes woman and her stew. They find the cracks and they widen them until they can pour themselves in." He was right, but the memory of her call still resonated within me, a seductive whisper promising relief from pain. I shivered despite the hospital's warmth. "You need to be careful, Ben," Marcus continued, his voice deadly serious. "If they marked Darren, and they're after you next, they might not be done with us." Before I could respond, the door opened and a police officer entered, her expression grave. "Mr. Collins, Mr. Harding, I'm Officer Reyes. I need to ask you a few more questions about your friend." We sat up, exchanging wary glances. Something in her tone suggested this wasn't a routine follow-up. "Has something happened?" Marcus asked. "Did they find Darren?" Officer Reyes pulled up a chair between our beds. Not exactly, but we've learned some information that complicates the situation. She consulted her notebook. You reported that your friend began acting strangely after developing some kind of rash or marking on his arm, correct? We nodded. And you spent last night in what you described as an old cabin somewhere in the wilderness area? Again, we confirmed this. We've been in contact with the Forest Service archives, she continued. There are no registered cabins or structures in the area you described. The last known dwelling in that region was a mining claim cabin belonging to a woman named Agnes Blackwood, who disappeared in 1978. My blood ran cold. Disappeared? Yes. After her husband died in a mining accident, she lived alone in the cabin for several years. Local hikers reported strange experiences near her property: disorientation, lost time, unusual sounds. In the summer of 1978, several hikers went missing in the area. When authorities finally investigated Blackwood's cabin, they found evidence of disturbing activities. What kind of activities? Marcus asked, his voice tight. Officer Reyes hesitated, as if debating how much to share. Ritualistic symbols carved into the floors and walls, animal remains, human teeth and bone fragments. The working theory was that Blackwood had been practicing some form of occult ritual, possibly connected to the missing hikers. But Blackwood herself was never found. And the cabin? I pressed, already knowing the answer. Burned to the ground by the Forest Service in 1979. There hasn't been a structure at that location for over 40 years. The implications hit us like a physical blow. The cabin we'd taken shelter in, the elderly woman who had fed us stew, couldn't have been real, at least not in any conventional sense. There's more, Officer Reyes said, her professional demeanor slipping slightly to reveal genuine concern. You mentioned a stone circle in your report to the search team. There are local legends about such a site in the Mazatzals, referred to in some historical documents as the Whispering Stones. Native American traditions warned against approaching the site, describing it as a thin place where spirits could cross between worlds. Did they find it? Marcus asked. The search teams? No. Based on your coordinates, they've been searching the area, but so far they've found nothing resembling a stone circle. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. However, they did find something else, carved into a large pine tree near where you reported last seeing your friend. Fresh markings, symbols that match descriptions in the Blackwood case files. A chill ran through me, remembering the strange angular patterns that had spread across Darren's skin. Do you think Darren could have carved them? I asked, grasping at the feeble hope that our friend was still himself, still human. Officer Reyes's expression told me she didn't share that hope. The symbols were carved 8 feet up the trunk, higher than a man could comfortably reach, and they were cut deep into the bark, which would require tools your friend didn't have. The implications hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Whatever had taken Darren wasn't human, and it wanted us to know that. I've worked in this area for 15 years, Officer Reyes continued, her voice softer now. The Mazatzal wilderness has always had stories. Experienced hikers who become inexplicably lost, strange sounds at night, hikers reporting encounters with people who couldn't possibly be there. Most of the time there are rational explanations. Weather conditions, wildlife, the disorienting nature of dense wilderness. She leaned forward, dropping her official tone entirely. But sometimes there aren't explanations that fit neatly into a police report. The search for your friend will continue, but I wanted you to know what we're really dealing with here, and to warn you. Warn us about what? Marcus asked. In the Blackwood case, the hikers who reported strange experiences didn't just encounter them in the wilderness. Some of them reported visitations after they returned home. Nightmares, voices calling their names, objects moving. A few of them eventually went back to the mountains voluntarily and were never seen again. My heart pounded painfully against my ribs as Officer Reyes stood to leave. "We'll keep you updated on the search," she promised. "In the meantime, if you experience anything unusual, anything at all, call me directly." She handed each of us her card. Day or night. After she left, Marcus and I sat in stunned silence, the hospital room suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable despite the bright fluorescent lighting and antiseptic normality. "She believes us," Marcus finally said. "Not what we told the search team, but what we really experienced." "Which means this has happened before," I replied, the full horror of our situation sinking in. "And it's not over." We were released from the hospital the following morning, with instructions to rest and rehydrate. The search for Darren continued, but updates from Ranger Coleman became increasingly sparse and vague. They had found his backpack abandoned on the trail, some personal items scattered as if dropped during a struggle, but no sign of Darren himself. Marcus drove me back to Phoenix, the journey passing in tense silence. We were both jumping at shadows, flinching at every unexpected sound. The rational part of my brain insisted that we were safe now, back in civilization, surrounded by the comforting noise and light of the city, but deeper instincts knew better. Whatever had taken Darren had marked me as next. The woman in white wasn't finished with me. "You shouldn't be alone," Marcus said as we pulled up outside my apartment building. "Come stay with me and Emily for a few days." The offer was tempting, but I shook my head. "I don't want to put you and your wife at risk. Whatever this is, it's focused on me now. Better if I face it alone." "That's exactly the kind of horror movie logic that gets people killed," Marcus argued, but I remained firm. "I'll keep my phone on. If anything happens, anything at all, I'll call you and Officer Reyes immediately." I tried to smile reassuringly. Besides, maybe it can't reach this far from the mountains. Maybe we're safe here. Even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The woman in white had called to me across miles of wilderness, had reached into my mind and touched my deepest vulnerabilities. Distance wouldn't protect me. Reluctantly, Marcus let me go, extracting multiple promises to check in regularly. I watched him drive away before entering my building, suddenly aware of how quiet the hallway was, how many shadows lurked in corners despite the overhead lighting. My apartment felt simultaneously like a sanctuary and a trap, familiar and safe, yet somehow exposed to forces I couldn't comprehend. I dropped my keys on the counter and headed straight for the shower, desperate to wash away the physical remnants of the ordeal. As the hot water sluiced over me, I half expected to see dark symbols appearing on my skin like they had on Darren's, but my body remained unmarked, outwardly at least. Clean and dressed in fresh clothes, I tried to re-establish normalcy. I ordered takeout, opened a beer, turned on the TV for background noise. But every creak of the building, every distant siren or slam of a neighbor's door sent my heart racing. I found myself checking the locks repeatedly, drawing the curtains tight, keeping lights on in every room. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and haunted. In my dreams, I wandered endless forests, pursued by something I couldn't see but could feel watching from every shadow. The woman in white appeared and vanished among the trees, always just ahead, leading me deeper into darkness. I heard Darren's voice calling for help, and Agnes's raspy laughter echoing through the dreamscape. I woke gasping, sheets tangled around me, the bedroom unnaturally cold despite the summer heat. In the corner of the room, barely visible in the pre-dawn gloom, stood a figure, the outline of a woman, motionless and watching. I lunged for the bedside lamp, fingers fumbling with the switch. When light flooded the room, the corner was empty, but the air still held a lingering scent of pine needles and something else, something metallic and ancient. Over the next 3 days, the incidents escalated. I would find pine needles scattered across the kitchen floor when I woke, though the windows had been closed all night. The electricity flickered without explanation. My phone would ring with no caller ID, and I would hear nothing but the sound of wind through trees and distant, indistinct whispering. At night, the dreams grew more intense. The woman in white no longer kept her distance but approached me directly, her face shifting between that of a beautiful young woman and a desiccated corpse. "Return to me," she would whisper, reaching out with fingers that elongated into claws. "Your place is with us now. Your friend awaits." I would see Darren in these dreams, standing silent among the whispering stones, his body covered in the strange symbols, his eyes solid black pools reflecting nothing. Sometimes he would speak, but not with his own voice. "She's coming for you, Ben. She always collects what's hers." On the fourth night, I woke to find my apartment door standing open, though I had triple-checked the locks before bed. A trail of damp pine needles led from the door to my bedroom, as if someone, or something, had stood over me as I slept. I called Officer Reyes the next morning, my voice shaking as I reported the escalating phenomena. To her credit, she didn't dismiss me or suggest psychological explanations. Instead, she asked precise, detailed questions about the timing and nature of each incident, making notes that I suspected wouldn't appear in any official report. "It's establishing a connection," she said finally, "creating a pathway between there and here, between their world and yours." "How do I stop it?" I demanded, desperation making my voice crack. There was a long pause before she answered. "The historical record suggests that there's only one way. You have to break the connection at its source." "You mean, go back to the mountains?" "To the stone circle specifically," she confirmed. "The legends say it's a doorway. As long as it remains open to you, they can follow." "And how exactly do I close this doorway?" I asked, fear battling with the growing certainty that she was right. "That part isn't clear," she admitted, "but the native traditions mention fire as a purifying force, and salt as a barrier. It wasn't much to go on, but it was something. A possible defense, however slim. I can't officially advise you to go back up there," Officer Reyes added quickly. "The search for your friend is ongoing, and that area is considered potentially dangerous. But unofficially—" She trailed off, the implication clear. I thanked her and hung up, already knowing what I had to do. I called Marcus next, explaining the situation and my intention to return to the Mazatzals. "Absolutely not," he responded immediately. "You're walking right into their trap." "I'm already in their trap," I countered. "Every night they get closer. If I stay here, waiting, I'll end up like Darren, or worse. At least this way I'm choosing the battlefield." He argued passionately, but eventually conceded that I might be right. "Then I'm coming with you," he insisted. "You're not facing this alone." I tried to dissuade him, to protect him from the danger, but his loyalty wouldn't allow it. "We started this together," he said firmly. "We'll finish it together." 2 days later, we were back at the Barnhart trailhead, our packs filled with supplies both practical and esoteric. Matches, flashlights, and first aid kits alongside salt, sage bundles, and a small container of blessed oil that Marcus had somehow procured from a local church. "I did some research," he explained as we prepared to set out. "Every culture has traditions about warding off spirits. I figured we'd cover as many bases as possible." The hike up was tense but uneventful. We saw search teams in the distance, the hunt for Darren still officially ongoing, but avoided them, taking less traveled paths toward where we believed the stone circle might be. "Do you think we'll be able to find it?" I asked as the day wore on. "The search teams couldn't." "I think it will find us," Marcus replied grimly. "Or rather, it will let you find it, because it wants you there." He was right. As evening approached, bringing with it a thick mountain mist that reduced visibility to mere yards, I began to feel a pull, a certainty about which way to go that defied rational explanation. Without consulting the map, I found myself turning onto game trails and pushing through underbrush with unerring precision. "You feel it, don't you?" Marcus observed, following close behind. "The connection." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The pull was growing stronger with each step, a hook lodged deep in my psyche, drawing me forward. Part of me wanted to resist, to turn back, but a deeper part, the part that had responded to the woman in white in the stone circle, welcomed the guidance, eager to reach our destination. The mist thickened as darkness fell, transforming the forest into a ghostly landscape of half-seen shapes and muffled sounds. We switched on our headlamps, but the light seemed to penetrate only a few feet before being swallowed by the supernatural fog. "We should stop," Marcus suggested as the going became increasingly difficult. "Make camp and continue in daylight." Even as he said it, I spotted a gap in the mist ahead, a strange clarity in the otherwise impenetrable whiteness. Without thinking, I moved toward it, drawn by an instinct beyond my control. The mist parted like a curtain, revealing the stone circle in a pocket of unnatural stillness. The ancient monoliths stood exactly as we had seen them before, their weathered surfaces gleaming dully in the light of a quarter moon that somehow penetrated the fog. At the center, the altar stone waited, its dark surface reflecting nothing. "Ben, wait!" Marcus called, hurrying to catch up as I stepped between two of the stones and entered the circle. Unlike our previous visit, the circle was silent and seemingly deserted. No spectral figures materialized from the darkness. No whispering voices rode the night air. There was only the stone altar, waiting. "It feels different," Marcus murmured, coming to stand beside me. "Empty, somehow." He was right. The oppressive sense of ancient power that had characterized our first encounter with the stone circle was muted now, as if the place was holding its breath, waiting. "Let's do what we came to do," I said, shrugging off my pack and retrieving the salt container, "before whatever lives here decides to show up." We worked quickly, Marcus lighting sage bundles while I poured salt in a continuous line around the perimeter of the altar stone. The plan, such as it was, involved cleansing the site with smoke, creating a salt barrier, and then leaving a small fire burning at the heart of the circle. The combined elements of purification that Officer Reyes had suggested might close the doorway. As we worked, the silence of the circle deepened, becoming almost tangible. The forest sounds beyond the stones. The rustle of night birds, the whisper of wind through pine needles, faded to nothing, leaving us in a bubble of perfect, unnatural quiet. "It knows we're here," Marcus whispered, his voice unnaturally loud in the silence. "It's watching." I nodded, pouring the last of the salt with trembling hands. "Let's finish this and get out." But even as I spoke, I felt it. A presence materializing behind me, a cold breath on the back of my neck. Without turning, I knew who, or what, had arrived. "You've returned to me." The woman in white's voice caressed my ears, somehow both seductive and threatening. "As I knew you would." Slowly, I turned to face her. She stood just beyond the salt circle, more solid and real-looking than in our previous encounter or my dreams. Her white dress glowed faintly in the darkness, her long dark hair moving slightly though there was no wind. Her face was beautiful yet wrong, the proportions slightly off, the eyes too large and deep, the smile too wide. "We've come to end this," I said, forcing strength into my voice, "to close the doorway." She laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "You cannot close what has always been open, Benjamin. This place existed before your kind had names for fear. It will remain long after your cities have crumbled to dust." "Where's Darren?" Marcus demanded, moving to stand beside me. "What have you done with him?" The woman's gaze shifted to Marcus, her expression hardening. "Your friend has been claimed by the Old Ones. His body serves, his spirit feeds, as will yours." Her eyes returned to me, softening into a parody of affection. "Except for you, my Benjamin. For you, I have other plans." "I'm not yours," I stated firmly, though something deep within me responded to her call, like a tuning fork vibrating to its matched tone. "Aren't you?" she countered, taking a step closer but stopping at the edge of the salt line. "You have carried emptiness within you for so long. The failure of your marriage, the emptiness of your days, the longing for connection. I can fill that void, Benjamin. I can make you complete." Her words struck at my core, exposing vulnerabilities I thought I had hidden even from myself. How could she know exactly what to say, exactly which wounds to probe? "Don't listen, Ben," Marcus warned, gripping my shoulder. "It's the same trick it used before, finding the cracks to slip inside." The woman hissed at him, her lovely face momentarily contorting into something inhuman. "Silence. You are not part of this covenant. You were not chosen." "Neither was I," I responded, finding strength in Marcus's presence. "I never agreed to any covenant." "But you did," she insisted, her voice honeyed again. "When you entered our domain, when you slept within our circle, when you dreamed of me and didn't turn away." She extended a hand toward me, stopping just short of the salt barrier. "And most of all, when you came back." As if responding to her words, the ground beneath our feet began to vibrate subtly. The salt line trembled, grains dancing on the mossy earth. "We need to hurry," Marcus urged, fumbling for the matches to light our planned fire. The woman's expression changed, anger replacing seduction. "You think your pitiful rituals can stand against us? Against what has dwelled here since before your kind crawled from the mud?" The vibration intensified, and I heard a new sound beyond the stones. Branches breaking, heavy footfalls approaching through the forest. Multiple sets of footfalls. "We've got company," I warned, scanning the darkness beyond the circle. Shapes began to materialize from the mist, human-like but wrong, moving with jerky, unnatural gaits. As they drew closer, I recognized the first of them with a jolt of horror. Darren stepped into the faint moonlight, but not the Darren we had known. His skin was covered entirely in the strange symbols, which seemed to writhe and shift across his flesh like living things. His eyes remained the solid black pools I had seen in my dreams, and his mouth hung slightly open, as if the thing animating his body hadn't quite figured out how to close it properly. Behind him came others, men and women of various ages, all bearing the same symbols, all moving with the same puppet-like motion. The lost hikers, I realized. The ones who had never been found. The ones who, like Darren, had been claimed by whatever ancient power dwelled in these mountains. "Your final chance. Benjamin," the woman in white said, her voice now echoing strangely, layered with other voices speaking in unison. "Join us willingly, or join us in pieces, like your friend." Darren's mouth opened wider than humanly possible, revealing teeth that had been filed to points. A sound emerged, not words, but a high, keening wail that set my teeth on edge and sent a shock of primal terror through my system. "Now!" Marcus shouted, striking a match and touching it to the small pile of kindling we had prepared near the altar stone. The fire caught quickly, flames leaping higher than they should have from such a small starter. As the fire grew, the woman in white recoiled, her form becoming less solid, more shadow-like. "The oil," I reminded Marcus, who quickly uncorked the small vial of blessed oil and dripped it into the flames. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The fire flared blue-white, sending up a column of spark-filled smoke that swirled unnaturally, forming patterns in the air that hurt the eyes to look upon. The woman in white screamed, a sound of such rage and pain that I instinctively covered my ears. The possessed figures beyond the stones responded to her cry, lurching forward as one. But they stopped at the perimeter of the circle, unable or unwilling to cross the salt barrier that still held despite the trembling ground. "Is it working?" Marcus shouted over the howling wind that had suddenly risen, whipping around the stone circle in a counterclockwise direction. Before I could answer, the woman in white made her move. With a sound like tearing fabric, she launched herself across the salt line, not crossing it, but leaping over it entirely to land within our supposed sanctuary. "Fools!" she hissed, her form fluctuating between human and something elongated and insectile. "Your barrier is incomplete." She was right. In our haste and fear, we had circled the altar with salt, but not the entire stone circle. We had protected the heart, but left the doorway itself vulnerable. Marcus reacted quickly, throwing a handful of salt directly at the apparition. Where the crystals touched her form, they sizzled and smoked, creating small holes in her substance that quickly closed again. She screamed in fury and pain, launching herself at Marcus with inhuman speed. Her fingers had elongated into talons that raked across his chest, tearing through his jacket and the flesh beneath. He cried out, stumbling backward, blood immediately darkening his torn clothing. Acting on pure instinct, I grabbed a burning branch from our fire and thrust it toward the entity. The flames seemed to repel her, forcing her back a step with a hiss of rage. "The fire works," I shouted to Marcus, who was now on one knee, clutching his bleeding chest. "We need more." Understanding flashed in his eyes. With a grimace of pain, he reached into his pack and pulled out the emergency flare we had brought, similar to the one that had saved us during our first encounter with the spirits. "Here," he called, tossing it to me. I caught it one-handed, still keeping the burning branch between myself and the woman in white, who circled warily, her form shifting between human and something else, something ancient and monstrous. "You cannot banish me from my own domain," she snarled, her voice distorting, multiple tones speaking simultaneously. "I am the mountain. I am the stone. I am the hunger in the dark." "You're nothing," I countered, twisting the cap of the flare to ignite it. "Just a parasite feeding on fear." As the flare burst into brilliant crimson light, the effect on the woman in white was immediate and dramatic. She shrieked, her form becoming transparent in the harsh illumination. Beyond the stones, the possessed figures, including Darren, recoiled as one, their black eyes reflecting the flare's light like animals caught in headlights. "The altar!" Marcus gasped, still on one knee. "Burn it! The altar is the anchor!" Understanding instantly, I thrust the flare against the ancient stone at the center of the circle. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like breaking glass, a crack appeared in the dark surface, a fracture that widened as I watched, spilling a viscous black substance that smoked where it touched the ground. The woman in white lunged for me with a howl of pure hatred, but Marcus was there, throwing the last of our salt into her face. This time, the effect was more pronounced. Her form dispersed like mist where the crystals touched, reforming slowly and incompletely. "Keep going," he urged, fumbling in his pack for the backup flare we had brought. The crack in the altar widened further, the black substance now gushing forth like arterial blood. The ground trembled violently, nearly knocking us off our feet. The standing stones themselves seemed to vibrate, ancient dust shaking loose from their surfaces. The woman in white made one last desperate attack, flinging herself at me with such force that we both tumbled to the ground. Her face hovered inches from mine, no longer even attempting to maintain its human appearance. What I saw instead was a nightmare collage of features: too many eyes, mandibles instead of a mouth, skin that rippled like the surface of boiling water. "If I cannot have you," the creature hissed in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, "then no one shall." Her claws dug into my shoulders, piercing flesh with excruciating pain. I felt something cold enter my bloodstream from her touch, a spreading numbness that raced toward my heart. Through the agony, I maintained my grip on the flare, twisting to press it directly against her chest. The entity screamed, a sound so high-pitched and alien that it felt like needles in my eardrums. Her form began to come apart, tatters of her substance dispersing into the night air. With her last coherent action, she locked her inhuman eyes on mine. "This isn't over," she promised, her voice now a dying whisper. "The doorway remains. What sleeps beneath will wake again." Then Marcus was there, the second flare blazing in his hand. He drove it directly into what remained of the creature's form, creating a blinding flash of crimson light and acrid smoke. When my vision cleared, the woman in white was gone. Beyond the stones, the possessed figures, including Darren, had collapsed like puppets with cut strings. The ground continued to shake, more violently now, as the black substance from the cracked altar stone spread across the mossy ground, killing everything it touched. "We need to go," Marcus shouted, pulling me to my feet. "Now!" We staggered from the stone circle just as the standing stones began to topple, crashing to the earth with impacts that shook the entire mountainside. The black substance had formed an expanding pool at the center of the circle, the earth itself seeming to dissolve wherever it touched. Supporting each other, bleeding and exhausted, we fled into the forest. Behind us, an unearthly wailing rose from the collapsing circle. Not a single voice, but hundreds, thousands of voices crying out in thwarted rage as their anchor in our world was destroyed. We didn't stop running until we physically couldn't continue, collapsing against a large pine far down the mountainside. Only then did we look back to see a column of pale, misty light shooting up from where the stone circle had been, illuminating the night sky briefly before dissipating into nothing. Did we do it?" I gasped, every breath painful from the wounds the entity had inflicted. Marcus, his face gray with pain and blood loss from his chest wounds, managed a grim smile. "I think we hurt them. I don't know if we destroyed them completely, but we closed the doorway. For now, at least." "Darren?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Marcus shook his head sadly. "I don't think that was Darren anymore. Not for a long time." We sat in silence for several minutes, processing what had happened, what we had lost, what we had possibly prevented. Finally, Marcus struggled to his feet. "We need to get off this mountain," he said, extending a hand to help me up. "And we need medical attention." "What do we tell people?" I asked as we began the slow, painful journey down toward the trail. "About Darren? About all of it?" "The truth," he replied simply. "To Officer Reyes, at least. She'll understand. To everyone else." He shrugged painfully. "We got lost. Darren fell. Whatever they need to hear so they stop asking questions." "And if anyone else goes missing up here?" I pressed. "If it starts again?" Marcus's expression darkened. "Then we come back. With more salt, more fire, more knowledge." He glanced back toward where the stone circle had been. "Whatever those things were, they've been feeding for a long time. They won't give up their hunting ground easily." I nodded, understanding the unspoken pact between us. We had survived. We had a responsibility now. The hike down was a nightmare of pain and exhaustion. By the time we reached the trailhead, the sun was rising, casting deceptively peaceful golden light across the wilderness that had nearly claimed us. Marcus's truck sat where we had left it, a mundane anchor to the normal world. We drove directly to the Payson Hospital, where our wounds raised immediate questions. We stuck to our story: a hiking accident, a fall, sharp rocks, while the doctors exchanged skeptical glances but ultimately treated our injuries without pressing further. Officer Reyes visited us that evening, her expression grim as she took in our bandages and haunted eyes. "You went back," she stated, not a question. We nodded. "And?" "We found the stone circle," I told her quietly. I think we closed it, destroyed it." "And your friend?" Marcus and I exchanged glances. "Darren's gone," Marcus answered finally. "He died up there, but it wasn't him anymore. Not at the end." Officer Reyes nodded, unsurprised. "The search teams found several bodies this morning, near where you described the stone circle. Hikers who had gone missing over the years. Your friend was among them." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The official report will state exposure and animal predation as the cause of death. Anything else would raise uncomfortable questions." "We understand," I said, grateful for her discretion, her acceptance of truths too strange and terrible for official documentation. "The interesting thing," she continued after a moment, is that they found the bodies in a clearing where several large boulders had apparently recently fallen. Natural erosion, according to the geologists, but locals are already calling it a miracle that these missing persons cases have finally been resolved. A miracle that had cost Darren his life and would give his family closure, but not the full truth. I wondered if that was mercy or another form of cruelty. "Will it stay closed?" I asked her directly. "The doorway." Officer Reyes considered this, her weathered face solemn. "The native legends say these thin places can never be truly destroyed, only sealed for a time. But the seals can last generations if they're made with sufficient sacrifice." The implication hung heavy in the air. Darren's life. Our blood. The price paid to close the doorway. "Then it's over?" Marcus asked. "For now," Officer Reyes replied. "For you." She stood to leave, then hesitated. "But I wouldn't go back to those mountains if I were you. Ever. Some places remember those who've hurt them." She left us with that warning, which neither of us had any intention of ignoring. We were discharged from the hospital the next day and returned to Phoenix, to the world of traffic and office buildings and ordinary human concerns. The official story became that we had experienced a hiking accident in which Darren had been separated from us and tragically died of exposure. The discovery of his body, along with those of other missing hikers, was treated as a sad but welcome resolution that gave families closure. Marcus and I attended Darren's funeral, carrying the burden of a truth we could never share with his grieving parents and sister. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild my life. I changed apartments, unable to feel comfortable in the space that had been invaded by the woman in white. I joined a grief support group, ostensibly to process Darren's death, but really to be among people who understood loss and the complex emotions that accompanied survival. The nightmares continued, though with decreasing frequency. The woman in white still visited my dreams occasionally, but she seemed diminished, distant, able to watch but not to touch. Sometimes I would wake to the faint scent of pine needles in my bedroom, a subtle reminder that while the doorway might be closed, the memories and the watchful entities beyond remained. Marcus and I stayed in contact, meeting for a beer every few weeks to check in, to reassure ourselves that the other was still whole, still human, still free from the influence of what lurked in the Mazatzel wilderness. We never spoke directly about what had happened. Not in public spaces where others might overhear, but the knowledge bound us together in a way that transcended ordinary friendship. Officer Reyes called occasionally, ostensibly to follow up on the case, but really, I think, to confirm that we hadn't experienced any further manifestations. She became a strange kind of ally, one of the few people in the world who knew even a fraction of the truth. 6 months after our ordeal, I received a small package in the mail. No return address, just my name typed on a plain label. Inside was a carved wooden figure, crude but recognizable as a standing stone, along with a handwritten note on Forest Service letterhead. "Thought you should know. Hikers reporting strange experiences near Chilson Spring again. Disorientation, lost time, whispers at night. Nothing conclusive yet, but keeping an eye on it. Remember what I said about thin places." Reyes. I stared at the note for a long time, feeling the familiar cold dread seeping back into my bones. The doorway was opening again. Or perhaps a new one was forming. The hunger in the mountains remained unsatisfied. That night, for the first time in months, I dreamed vividly of the woman in white. She stood among new standing stones, smaller, rougher, but arranged in the same circular pattern, her form more shadow than substance, but gradually solidifying. "I told you it wasn't over, Benjamin," she whispered, her voice faint but strengthening. "What sleeps beneath is stirring. The hunger grows, and I have not forgotten you." I woke with her laughter echoing in my ears and the certainty of what I had to do. One phone call to Marcus confirmed he'd experienced the same dream, felt the same pull. Some doorways can never be truly closed, Some hungers never fully satisfied. Some responsibilities cannot be abandoned, no matter the cost. The Mazatzal wilderness waits, ancient and patient, its secrets and horrors buried shallow beneath the peaceful surface. And we, the marked, the chosen, the survivors, must return to ensure those secrets remain buried. Because if we don't, who will? My name is Jessica Davis, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Superstition Mountains of Arizona, a place I should have known better than to visit alone. I'd always been the adventurous type. Growing up in Phoenix, I'd heard all the stories about the Superstition Mountains, the legend of the Lost Dutchman's gold mine, mysterious disappearances, and strange phenomena that couldn't be explained. But I was a rational woman, a high school biology teacher with a master's degree and a healthy skepticism of the supernatural. Those were just stories meant to keep tourists spending money in gift shops and on guided tours. My life had become predictable, stifling even. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, and Mark had already moved on with someone 10 years younger. I needed something to remind me that I was still alive, still capable of facing challenges on my own. A solo hiking trip through the Superstition seemed like the perfect way to prove it, to myself, if no one else. I'd planned meticulously, mapping my 4-day route through the wilderness, packing my gear with scientific precision. I'd even taken a wilderness survival course at REI the month before. Everything was accounted for: water filtration, emergency shelter, first aid, navigation. I'd left my itinerary with my sister Diane, with strict instructions to call search and rescue if she didn't hear from me by Sunday evening. The trailhead at Peralta was busy when I arrived early Thursday morning, but I knew that would change once I pushed deeper into the wilderness. The weathered sign at the entrance read, "Welcome to the Superstition Wilderness," with a smaller line underneath. "Enter at your own risk." Standard liability language, I thought with a smile. I adjusted my pack, checked my GPS one last time, and headed up the trail. The first day was everything I'd hoped for. The desert was in bloom after recent rains, with ocotillo sporting their fiery red tips and prickly pear showing off yellow blossoms. I took photos of a horned lizard, watched a red-tailed hawk circle overhead, and even spotted a coatimundi scurrying through the underbrush. By late afternoon, I'd made it to my first campsite near Weaver's Needle, that iconic spire of rock that dominates the Superstition skyline. I set up my tent with plenty of daylight left, cooked a simple meal on my portable stove, and watched the sunset paint the ragged mountains in shades of orange and purple. As darkness fell, I noticed how complete it was out here, away from city lights. The stars were magnificent, more than I'd ever seen, even on school camping trips with the astronomy club. That first night, I slept soundly, wrapped in my sleeping bag, lulled by the gentle whisper of wind through the desert vegetation. The second day started with a stunning sunrise and a 5-mile hike to Charlebois Spring. The trail grew more rugged, and I encountered fewer hikers the farther I went. By noon, I hadn't seen another person for hours. The solitude was exactly what I'd come for, a chance to hear my own thoughts for once. Around 2 in the afternoon, I noticed the first odd thing. My GPS, which had been working perfectly, suddenly showed me off trail by nearly half a mile. I double-checked my paper map and compass. I was exactly where I should be, following the trail markers. I rebooted the device, and it corrected itself, but a lingering unease stayed with me. I reached Charlebois Spring by mid-afternoon. The water was flowing well after the recent rains, and I refilled my bottles after running the water through my filter. As I was securing the cap on my second bottle, I noticed the carving. It was on a nearby saguaro cactus, which was strange in itself, as damaging the iconic plants is highly illegal in Arizona. The carving was crude but unmistakable, a stick figure with elongated limbs and an oversized head. Next to it were 3 words, "She watches you." A chill ran through me despite the afternoon heat. Some idiot's idea of a joke, I told myself. probably teenagers who hiked out here to drink beer away from their parents. I took a photo of the carving to report to the park rangers when I got back, then continued on my way. My campsite for the second night was in a sheltered area near a small seasonal creek, now reduced to a series of disconnected pools. I set up my tent, gathered some rocks to create a fire ring, and collected what little deadwood I could find. Desert fires had to be small and carefully maintained, but the nights got cold, and I wanted the comfort of flames. As the sun began to set, I tried starting my fire. The kindling caught easily enough, but every time the larger pieces began to burn, the flames would suddenly die down to embers. I tried 3 times with the same result, flames that refused to stay lit. Eventually, I gave up, blaming the wood's dampness from the recent rains. I heated a freeze-dried meal on my camp stove instead and settled in to eat as darkness fell completely around me. That's when I first heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound, almost like breathing but with a slight whistle at the end of each exhale. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I flicked on my headlamp and shone it in a circle around my camp. Nothing moved in the beam of light. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice sounded small against the vastness of the desert night. No response came, but the breathing sound stopped. I told myself it was just the wind moving through the rock formations. The superstitions were known for their acoustic oddities. Wind through certain canyons could sound like voices, even words sometimes. That's where half the legends came from, I reasoned. I crawled into my tent earlier than planned, zipping the door shut with a finality that made me feel childishly safe, as if nylon could keep out anything truly dangerous. I read a few pages of the murder mystery I'd brought along, but found myself rereading the same paragraph over and over, unable to focus. Eventually, I turned off my headlamp and tried to sleep. That's when the tapping started. Gentle at first, like raindrops on the tent fly, but there was no mistaking the rhythm. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause. It moved around the tent, from one side to the other, sometimes at the door, sometimes near my head. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. The tapping stopped immediately. I fumbled for my headlamp and turned it on, unzipping the tent door with shaking hands. The beam of light revealed nothing but desert shrubs and cacti, swaying slightly in the night breeze. I closed the tent and sat up, wrapping my arms around my knees. I wasn't going to let my imagination get the better of me. I'd grown up hearing the stories about La Llorona and El Chubascos, my grandmother's attempts to keep me and my cousins from wandering off. This was no different, just my brain interpreting normal wilderness sounds through a filter of isolation and darkness. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because I woke to bright sunlight filtering through the tent fabric. The night's uneasiness seemed silly in the morning light. I made coffee on my camp stove, packed up my gear, and set off for the 3rd day's destination. Miner's Needle, an area known for its abandoned prospector sites. The hiking was tougher that day. The trail grew faint in places, forcing me to rely on my map and compass more than usual. My GPS was behaving erratically again, sometimes placing me in locations I knew couldn't be right, other times failing to update my position for long stretches. By early afternoon, the temperature had climbed into the high 90s, and I was rationing my water more carefully than planned. I found shade beneath an overhanging rock and rested for an hour, waiting for the worst of the heat to pass. As I sat there, I noticed the symbols. They were subtle, etched into the sandstone of the overhang, concentric circles with lines radiating outward, spirals, and what looked like crude stick figures similar to the one I'd seen carved into the saguaro. These weren't fresh. They had the patina of age, possibly indigenous petroglyphs. But one symbol stood out from the others. A humanoid figure with an elongated neck and what appeared to be horns or antlers. Next to it was a more recent carving. Emma finds you. I felt my heart rate increase. Emma. That was my mother's name, dead now for 15 years. It had to be coincidence, a common name. Still, I couldn't help but feel that the message was meant for me specifically. I took several photos, then shouldered my pack and continued hiking, eager to put distance between myself and that unsettling discovery. The landscape changed subtly as I hiked deeper into the wilderness. The saguaros became fewer, replaced by twisted junipers and pinyon pines that clung to the increasingly rocky terrain. The trail wound through narrow passes between towering rock formations that blocked the sun, creating pockets of deep shadow even in the afternoon. It was in one of these shadowy passages that I first saw her. Just a glimpse, a figure standing atop a ridge about 50 yards ahead. A woman, thin, with long dark hair blowing in the wind. She was too far away to make out her features, but something about her stillness made my skin crawl. She wasn't dressed like a hiker. She appeared to be wearing some kind of long, pale dress that fluttered around her ankles. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing off the rock walls. The figure didn't move or respond. I blinked and she was gone. I stood frozen, staring at the empty ridge. Had I imagined her? The heat and exertion could cause hallucinations. I knew that from my wilderness training. I drank more water and ate an energy bar, trying to steady my nerves. I reached my planned campsite near Miner's Needle by late afternoon. The area was beautiful but eerie. An old prospector's stone cabin, now reduced to 3 crumbling walls and scattered rubble. Nearby was a shaft entrance, sealed off with metal bars and warning signs about the dangers of abandoned mines. I set up camp about 50 yards from the ruins, wanting to maintain a respectful distance from what was essentially a historical site. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every few minutes I'd turn quickly, half expecting to see the woman in the pale dress standing among the ruins. But there was never anyone there. I made dinner early, forcing myself to eat despite my diminishing appetite. As the sun began to set, I tried again to light a fire. This time, the wood caught, but the flames burned with an odd bluish tinge that made me uneasy. I told myself it was just mineral deposits in the wood affecting the color, but I let the fire die out after only half an hour. Night fell heavily. The moon was thinner than the previous night, providing less light. I sat outside my tent for a while, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds of the desert. Coyotes called in the distance, their yips and howls echoing across the landscape. Then I heard something else. Singing. A woman's voice, soft and melodic, coming from the direction of the ruined cabin. The words were indistinct, but the tune was hauntingly familiar. A lullaby my mother used to sing to me. I felt my body go cold despite the lingering heat of the day. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice stronger than I felt. The singing stopped abruptly. I grabbed my flashlight and, against my better judgment, walked toward the ruins. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the crumbling walls and scattered stones. There was no one there, of course. I was alone in the wilderness, my mind playing tricks on me. As I turned to go back to my tent, my light caught something inside the ruins that I hadn't noticed before. A small cairn of stones in the center of what would have been the cabin's main room. Atop the cairn was what looked like a crudely made doll fashioned from twigs and what might have been human hair, dark and long. My hand trembled, causing the flashlight beam to dance across the macabre object. I wanted to run back to my tent, pack up in the dark and hike out immediately. But that would be foolish. Nighttime hiking in unfamiliar terrain was a recipe for injury or worse. I backed away from the ruins, keeping my light trained on them until I reached my tent. Once inside, I zipped the door shut and, for the first time, used the small luggage lock I'd brought to secure the zipper pulls together. It wouldn't stop anyone determined to get in, but it made me feel marginally safer. I didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion eventually won out over fear. My dreams were troubled. Visions of a gaunt woman with hollow eyes and long, tangled hair the color of dirt. She stood over me, singing that lullaby, her skeletal fingers reaching for my face. I woke with a start just before dawn, my heart pounding. Something was different about the tent. There was a smell, unfamiliar and unpleasant. Musty, like old, damp clothes left too long in a basement. I fumbled for my headlamp and shone it around the tent's interior. My backpack was open. I distinctly remembered closing it before going to sleep. I always did, to keep out scorpions and other nocturnal creatures. But now it gaped open, my belongings obviously rummaged through. My map was missing, as was my GPS device. The zipper of the tent door was still locked from the inside. I felt panic rising in my throat. This wasn't possible. No one could have opened my pack without entering the tent, and no one could have entered without unlocking the door. Yet here was the evidence before my eyes. With trembling hands, I unlocked the tent door and peered outside. The pre-dawn light cast everything in a bluish-gray hue, making the landscape look alien and unwelcoming. My eyes were immediately drawn to a new arrangement of stones about 10 feet from my tent. Another cairn, this one larger than the one in the ruins. Atop it was my map, impaled on a stick. I crawled out of the tent and approached the cairn cautiously. As I got closer, I could see that something was drawn on the map. A crude X made with what looked like dirt or ash, marking a location about 2 miles north of my current position. This had gone beyond weird coincidences or my imagination working overtime. Someone was out here with me. Someone who could enter a locked tent without leaving evidence. Someone who knew things about me they shouldn't know. I needed to get out of there. I packed up camp in record time, barely taking care with my equipment as I stuffed it haphazardly into my backpack. The sun was just cresting the eastern mountains as I set off, heading south instead of continuing east as originally planned. South would take me to the Peralta trailhead faster, though it meant going off my planned route. Without my GPS or map, I had to rely on my compass and what I remembered of the terrain. I'd studied the area extensively before the trip, but memory is an imperfect tool when fear clouds your thinking. I'd been hiking for about an hour when I realized I was off course. The landmarks weren't matching up with what I expected to see. I should have encountered a distinctive rock formation called the Praying Monk, but it was nowhere in sight. Instead, I found myself in an unfamiliar canyon, the walls rising steeply on either side. I stopped to catch my breath and assess my situation. The sun was climbing higher, and with it, the temperature. I checked my water supply, enough for the day if I was careful, but not much more. I needed to find my way back to a marked trail. That's when I heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from around a bend in the canyon ahead of me. I froze, listening intently. The steps were uneven, as if the person was limping or dragging something. They grew louder, closer. I looked for somewhere to hide, but the canyon walls were too steep to climb quickly, and there was no vegetation large enough to conceal me. I was trapped in plain sight. A figure emerged from around the bend. It wasn't the woman I'd glimpsed earlier. It was a man, elderly, dressed in what looked like prospector's clothes from another century. Canvas pants, a faded flannel shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He moved with the awkward gait I'd heard, one foot dragging slightly behind the other. He stopped about 20 feet from me, his head tilted as if studying me. Then he spoke, his voice dry as the desert around us. "You shouldn't be here, Jessica. This ain't your place." My name. He knew my name. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "Folks call me Old Man Dutton," he replied. "Been working these mountains longer than you've been breathing." The Lost Dutchman. It couldn't be. That was just a legend. A story about a German immigrant who discovered a gold mine in the 1800s and died before revealing its location. "That's impossible," I said, taking an involuntary step backward. "The Dutchman died over a century ago." The old man chuckled, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Death ain't what you think it is, girl. Not out here in the superstitions. Emma knows that now. Your mama learned it the hard way." A cold shock ran through me. My mother died of cancer in Phoenix. The old man shook his head slowly. "That what they told you? Convenient story. Truth is, she came looking for me, same as others before her. These mountains call to certain folks, those with the blood, your blood. My head swam with confusion and disbelief. This couldn't be happening. My mother had never mentioned the superstitions or any connection to them. She'd been a practical woman, a nurse who scoffed at superstition. "You're lying," I said, finding some strength in anger. "I don't know who you are or how you know these things about me, but I'm leaving now." I made to step around him, giving him a wide berth. "She won't let you leave," the old man said matter-of-factly. "The witch of Weaver's Needle. She's claimed you already. Marked you." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, stopping despite my desire to flee. "The woman in white, La Bruja, guardian of the gold. Those who see her are already in her grasp." He pointed a gnarled finger at my arm. I looked down and gasped. There, on my forearm, was a mark I hadn't noticed before, a dark bruise in the shape of what looked like elongated fingers, as if someone had gripped me tightly. "I don't remember getting this," I whispered more to myself than to him. "Course you don't. She comes in the night, in dreams. Marks her chosen ones." The old man took off his hat, revealing a face weathered beyond normal aging, skin like cracked leather stretched over sharp bones. His eyes were the most unsettling feature, pale blue, almost white with no discernible pupils. "What does she want with me?" My voice sounded small even to my own ears. "Same thing she wants from all of them. A vessel. A way back." "Back from where?" "From the in-between. She's been trapped there since I sent her over. Oh, must be 1892 or thereabouts. Can't cross over fully. Can't return to life. Unless she finds someone with the right blood. Family blood." A chill ran through me despite the growing heat of the day. "You're saying my mother came here? That this witch took her?" The old man nodded solemnly. "Your mother escaped the first time. Came back years later, when the calling got too strong to resist. That's when La Bruja took her. Used her up." He gestured vaguely at the air around us. "She's part of the mountain now. All of them are." I thought I might be sick. This couldn't be real. My mother had died in a hospital bed. I was there. I held her hand as she slipped away. Hadn't I? The memory suddenly seemed hazy. Details I thought were crystal clear now blurred and uncertain. "I need to go," I said, taking another step back. "Won't do no good," Old Man Dutton said, "but there's a way you might survive. The witch's cabin, up by Devil's Canyon. You'll find what you need there, something of your mother's. Blood calls to blood." He pointed north, the same direction as the X on my defiled map. "Why should I trust you?" I asked. "Ain't about trust, girl. It's about survival. Go south, she'll find you before sundown. Go north, to the cabin. You got a chance." He put his hat back on and adjusted it carefully. "Your choice, but choose quick. Sun's getting high, and she grows stronger with the heat." With that, he turned and began walking back the way he'd come, his uneven gait making his progress slow but steady. "Wait," I called after him. "What am I looking for? What of my mother's?" He didn't turn around, but his voice carried back to me. "You'll know it when you see it. Blood always knows." Then he rounded the bend in the canyon and was gone. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. Part of me wanted to run after him, demand more answers, clearer directions. But a larger part wanted to flee in the opposite direction, get back to civilization as quickly as possible. I checked my compass with shaking hands. North or south? Trust the ravings of an old man who couldn't possibly be who he claimed, or follow my original escape plan? My eyes fell on the bruise on my arm again, distinct finger marks that I had no memory of receiving. 5 elongated marks, too long and thin to be human fingers. North, then. To this cabin he'd mentioned. I could always change course if it seemed like a trap. I adjusted my pack and set off, following the canyon as it curved northeast. The sun climbed higher, beating down relentlessly. The landscape became increasingly unfamiliar. Rock formations that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Shadows that were too dark and moved slightly against the wind. Around noon, I began to hear the whispering. It started as what I thought was the wind through the rocks, but gradually resolved into words, or fragments of words, just at the edge of comprehensibility. A woman's voice, sometimes talking, sometimes singing snatches of that familiar lullaby. Jessica. Come to Mother. Missed you so. Your blood. I walked faster, trying to outdistance the voice, but it kept pace with me. Sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, always just loud enough to hear but never quite clear enough to understand completely. I checked my water supply, half gone already. The heat was intense and I'd been moving quickly. I forced myself to slow down, to conserve energy and hydration. The landscape grew more rugged as I continued north. The relatively flat canyon gave way to steep ridges and deep gullies that forced me to climb and descend repeatedly. By mid-afternoon, I was exhausted and disoriented, unsure if I was still heading in the right direction. That's when I saw the cabin. It sat in a small clearing among twisted junipers, a crude structure built of stones and logs that had weathered to silver gray. The roof had partially collapsed, and one wall leaned precariously, but it was unmistakably a human dwelling. I approached cautiously, every instinct screaming at me to turn around. The air around the cabin seemed different, heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. The whispering had stopped, replaced by a silence so complete it hurt my ears. The door hung askew on leather hinges, opening onto darkness despite the bright sunlight outside. I hesitated at the threshold, then turned on my flashlight and stepped inside. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing a single room with a packed earth floor. There was little furniture, a crude table, the remains of what might have been a bed frame, a toppled stool. The walls were covered with symbols similar to those I'd seen under the rock overhang, but these were more elaborate, more numerous. They'd been drawn with something dark that had seeped into the wood. Blood, I realized with horror. The symbols were drawn in blood. In the center of the room was another cairn of stones, larger than the others I'd seen. Atop it sat a small wooden box, intricately carved with the same symbols that adorned the walls. I approached it slowly, my flashlight beam shaking with my trembling hand. The box seemed to absorb the light, the wood unnaturally dark and dense. Old Man Dutton had said I'd find something of my mother's here. Could this be it? I reached for the box, then hesitated, remembering every horror movie I'd ever seen where someone opened something they shouldn't. But what choice did I have? I was lost, running out of water, being stalked by something that knew my name and my deepest fears. I picked up the box. It was heavier than it looked, and warm to the touch despite the coolness of the cabin's interior. There was no lock, just a simple wooden latch. I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like dried herbs and small bones, was a silver locket. My mother's locket, the one she always wore, the one that should have been buried with her. I recognized the intricate engraving, the slight dent on one side from when I dropped it as a child. With trembling fingers, I picked it up. The chain was broken, as if it had been torn from someone's neck. I pressed the tiny release and the locket opened to reveal the photos inside. My father on one side, me as a baby on the other. "Mom?" I whispered, a tear sliding down my cheek. The whispers returned instantly, louder than before, seeming to come from directly behind me. "Jessica, my sweet girl. Help Mother." I whirled around, the flashlight beam cutting through the dimness of the cabin. She stood in the doorway, blocking the exit. The woman in white I'd glimpsed on the ridge. Up close, I could see that her dress was not white but a pale gray, stained and tattered. Her hair hung in long, tangled masses around a face that was both familiar and wrong. My mother's features, but elongated. The skin stretched too tight over the bones. The eyes sunken and filled with a hungry light that was nothing like my mother's warm gaze. "You came," she said, her voice a dry rasp that still somehow held echoes of my mother's tone. "As I knew you would. Blood calls to blood." I clutched the locket tightly, backing away until I hit the cairn of stones. "You're not my mother." The thing in the doorway tilted its head at an unnatural angle, a smile spreading across its face that was too wide, revealing teeth that were sharp and numerous. "No? Look again, daughter. Look closer." Its form seemed to shift, the monstrous features receding, replaced by my mother as I remembered her. Warm eyes, gentle smile, the laugh lines around her mouth that deepened when she was amused. "Jessica, honey, I've been waiting for you," it said, my mother's voice now perfect and familiar. "I've been trapped here so long." I felt tears streaming down my face, my heart torn between longing and terror. My mother died in Phoenix. I was there. The creature's form flickered, briefly revealing the monstrous visage beneath the familiar features. "You saw what she wanted you to see. A comfortable lie. The truth is, I came here, looking for answers about our family, about the dreams that plagued me my whole life. Dreams of this place, of these mountains." She took a step into the cabin, and I noticed that her feet didn't quite touch the ground. "La Bruja found me, just as she found you, but I wasn't strong enough to help her cross over. You are. Together, we can free ourselves." "Cross over," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "From the in-between, the place between life and death where she's trapped me, where she's trapped all of us who bear the blood of those who wronged her." Another step forward. "Help me, Jessica. Take my place, and I can return to life." The realization hit me like a physical blow. "You want me to die so you can live?" The thing wearing my mother's face smiled sadly. "Not die, sweetheart. Just transition. You'll be with me, in a way. Part of the mountain, part of her power. It's our family's debt to pay." "No," I said, surprised by the firmness in my voice. "Whatever you are, you're not my mother. My mother would never ask that of me." The creature's face contorted with rage, the beautiful features melting away to reveal the gaunt, inhuman visage beneath. "You have no choice, child of my blood. La Bruja has marked you. You belong to her now, as I do." It lunged forward with unnatural speed, skeletal hands reaching for me. I threw myself sideways, crashing into the crude table, which collapsed under my weight. The creature hissed in frustration, pivoting toward me with that same horrible, unnatural fluidity. My hand closed around one of the table legs, a sturdy piece of wood that had broken off with a jagged end. As the creature lunged again, I swung it with all my strength. The makeshift weapon connected with the side of the thing's head with a sickening crunch that shouldn't have been possible if it were truly supernatural. It shrieked, a sound no human throat could make, and staggered back. I didn't wait to see more. I bolted for the door, shoving past the stunned creature. My shoulder burned where its fingers had scraped me, but I didn't slow down. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the clearing. I ran blindly, no direction in mind except away from the cabin, away from the thing that had tried to take me. I heard it behind me, recovering, an enraged howl that seemed to shake the very ground. The whispering voices returned, louder than ever, a chorus of tormented souls that filled the air around me. "You cannot escape. The blood debt. She will have you." I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out, then forced myself to keep going. Night was falling rapidly, but I couldn't stop. To stop was to die. Or worse. I don't know how long I ran before I saw the lights. Flashlights bobbing in the distance. Human voices called out, normal human voices. "Jessica Davis, Arizona Search and Rescue. Can you hear us?" I tried to call back, but my throat was too dry, my voice a mere croak. I stumbled toward the lights, waving my arms frantically. A beam caught me, then another. Figures approached. 3 men in search and rescue uniforms, solid and real and wonderfully normal. "Ms. Davis," the first one said as he reached me. "Your sister reported you missing when you didn't check in. Are you injured?" I tried to explain, words tumbling out in a confused jumble about the witch, the old man, the cabin, my mother. The rescuers exchanged glances that clearly questioned my mental state. "Let's get you some water and medical attention," one said kindly. "You're dehydrated and probably suffering from heat exhaustion." They led me back to their vehicle, where a medic checked me over, cleaning and bandaging the scratch on my shoulder, which looked alarmingly like fingernail marks. I gulped water and tried again to explain what had happened, but the words sounded insane even to my own ears. "We'll get you to a hospital," the team leader said, helping me into their truck. "You've been through quite an ordeal." As we drove away from the mountains, I clutched my mother's locket, which I'd somehow managed to keep hold of through everything. It felt warm against my palm, unnaturally so. I opened it one last time, wanting to see the familiar photos, to ground myself in something real. The pictures were gone. In their place was a tiny scrap of yellowed paper with words written in a spidery hand. "Blood debt not paid. She will find you again." I slammed the locket shut, my heart racing. When we reached the hospital, I asked a nurse to throw it away to get it as far from me as possible. That was 3 months ago. I've tried to convince myself that it was all a hallucination brought on by dehydration and isolation. The doctors certainly think so. They've been very understanding about my wilderness psychosis, as they call it. But I know what I saw, what I experienced. And lately, I've been having dreams of the Superstition Mountains, of a cabin in a clearing, of my mother calling me home. And when I wake, there are bruises on my arm, 5 elongated finger marks that fade by midday. Yesterday, I found a small wooden box on my doorstep. Inside was the silver locket, the chain repaired. I've packed my hiking gear. I'm going back to the mountains tomorrow. After all, blood calls to blood, and debts must be paid. As I write this final entry, the sun is setting outside my apartment window. The mountains are visible in the distance, silhouetted against the darkening sky. I swear I can see a faint light flickering among them, like a signal, a beacon calling me home. The locket sits on the table beside me, open now, revealing those missing photos once again. My father, myself as a baby. But if I look at them too long, the images seem to shift, revealing other faces beneath. Gaunt, hungry faces with eyes that know too much. I've told no one of my plans. Not my sister, not my friends, not the therapist who nods sympathetically during our twice-weekly sessions. They wouldn't understand. They'd try to stop me, to help me, but they can't help. No one can. I understand now what Old Man Dutton was trying to tell me, what my mother discovered before me. Our family has a debt that goes back generations. La Bruja didn't choose us randomly. We've been hers all along, since an ancestor crossed her in the 1800s. I've been researching our family history, and I found mentions of a great-great-grandfather who came to Arizona during the gold rush. There are gaps in the records after that, unexplained disappearances. The scratches on my arm have been getting deeper. Last night I woke to find bloody furrows where those 5 elongated fingers had gripped me. The wounds should have needed stitches, but by morning they had scabbed over, healing at an impossible rate. My blood is different now, changed. Sometimes I catch glimpses of her in reflective surfaces, behind me in the bathroom mirror, watching from the darkened screen of my television, her form distorted in the chrome of my kitchen faucet. I no longer scream when I see her. We're past that now, she and I. I've learned that fighting is pointless. Old Man Dutton was right about one thing. The only way out is through. I need to go back to that cabin, to face what waits for me there. Maybe I can bargain with her. Maybe there's a way to pay the debt without becoming what my mother became. Or maybe that's just another comfortable lie I tell myself. I keep the doors locked and the blinds drawn, but it doesn't matter. She finds ways in. The house creaks at night with footsteps that shouldn't be there. The faucets turn on by themselves, pouring water that runs red for the first few seconds. My phone rings with calls from my mother's old number, and when I answer, I hear that lullaby, distorted and slowed down like a damaged record. I'm not crazy. I know how it sounds, but I'm not. If anything, I'm seeing clearly for the first time. Tomorrow, I'll hike into the superstitions alone. No itinerary left with anyone this time. No GPS tracker in my pack. Just me, my gear, and the locket. I'll find the cabin again, or it will find me. Maybe you'll read about me in the news. Another hiker gone missing in the superstition wilderness. They'll search for weeks, bringing in dogs and helicopters and volunteers. They'll find nothing, of course, just another mystery for the mountains to keep. Or maybe, years from now, some lone hiker will stray from the trail and glimpse a woman in a pale dress standing on a distant ridge. She'll call out a name, not mine, but one that belongs to someone with my blood. And the cycle will continue. As I finish writing this, my hands are shaking, not with fear but with anticipation. There's a certain relief in surrender, in finally accepting what you've been fighting all along. The sun has set completely now. Night has claimed the mountains. And somewhere out there, she's waiting for me. For anyone who finds this account, don't come looking for me. If you're reading this, it's already too late. I've gone to pay my family's debt, to become part of the mountain, part of her power, to become one of the whispers in the superstition.